Looks like we're live. It says we're live anyway. All right, y'all. Happy hump day and day before Thanksgiving. So we're going to try to keep this a little short tonight. I know a lot of people are probably traveling. Shit like that. Every time I have to copy my own link here, I have to see myself and hear myself. And that was loud. Am I loud to you all? There goes my notifications. So let me get these links shared. And when I start saying hello back, that's when I'm back in it. So we're going to try to not get too far behind tonight. And we promised a lot of beginners, hopefully the beginners that were here last week or Saturday come back and we can go over the basics for them and go over just the fundamentals of distillation and a little more help in still selection and depending on what they want and kind of give them a step-by-step on still building or on mash building, so they'll be able to know how to cook the grains properly and give them an all grain introduction, and then they can learn to gelatinize their corns and grains and extract the sugars out of the starches. And so hopefully we'll get those beginners back. And let me check this page. I need to make sure Mark ain't live right now. I don't want to post on him. If he is, he's not. Okay. Yeah, he might not. His work schedule varies so much, you never know if he's going to be able to do it or not. But if so, he can delete that. Because I don't want to post on someone's page if they've got something going on themselves. That's not very cool. So I hope everybody's going to be with family tomorrow and gets their bellies filled up, and hopefully some of y'all are able to take your family some wine or shine or something that you've made to help celebrate Thanksgiving. That's always welcome. My family, when I first started bringing wine to the holidays, I guess it was Christmas, the first time I brought something on Christmas, and they were kind of skeptical at first. They're like, uh-oh, he's brought wine. They thought it was going to be terrible, you know. And but after they held their noses and took a drink, they were like, wow, that's actually not bad. So my family, that's a big comment. That's a big compliment in my family. If it's bad, they'll let you know. If it's good, they'll say it's not bad. So if it's not bad, then I guess it passes the test. And I think that'll probably be the last link. Yeah, I knew it. Dang on it. I'll have to put that in the LPRs later. So we're going to try to keep this brief, and we're not going to try to go too much past the 10 o'clock mark. You made in here first, RK. That's good. What's going on, brother? What's going on, Curtis? Yeah, man. We're actually going to have breakfast at my sister's, and I guess Nan and I are going to do our own thing. My dad's getting ready. He has trouble. He's got dementia, and he's well into his 80s, so it's tough for him to spend a lot of time in one place, and stepmother takes care of him. So we're going to try to get him there early and do a little breakfast and spend some time early with him, and hopefully By the afternoon, I guess he'll be going back home and be in familiar area, you know. Yeah, last Wednesday we crashed. We sure did. Hopefully we're still up. Keep your fingers crossed. But I gave the link to Clint, and if it goes down, maybe he can grab that link I sent him and jump in there and pick up where it left off. Hopefully we won't have to test that, but if we do, oh hell, you ain't late. I've just got the link shared. Hope you're doing good, brother. What's going on, Frank? Yeah, Billy, I mean. Just playing with your meat. Oh, hell. Who's smoking your meat? Yeah, that's good. Everybody needs to get their meat smoked here once in a while, don't you? Oh, I did say this ain't anybody under 21, didn't I? All right, so we'll give people time to get in here while we sit and chat. So my apple's going. I guess my EC1118 is getting less and less effective. I put everything in there and it didn't. I did the starter with the EC1118. It foamed up a little bit, but when I poured it in the juice, it didn't do nothing for a couple of days. And I was like, well, damn. Well, that's not good. I was going to put some rye on top of it and make some apple rye, but I'm not going to waste my rye if this is going to be a troublesome. Oh yeah, I'm glad you missed that. Sorry, brother. And we make them big and wide too. Big and wide. Reminds me of a little kindergarten song. Big and wide. But anyway, so I thought I'm not going to waste any rye if it's going to be a stuck or problematic fermentation. I looked at the temperature and it was mid to upper 70s. pH was fine. And so temperature fine, pH was fine. And I know it had plenty of sugar in it. I had to put about, I guess the juice I used was 1040. All the juices that I used was 1040. So I added, about a pound per gallon to bring it up to 1080, which it did. And it wasn't doing nothing. I had my yeast nutrients in there, my DAP, and everything, pH, everything was in there good. All my numbers good. So I guess it had to be the yeast. So I threw a little bit of the Red Star Distillers yeast on it. I probably should have gone with I've got some Premier Blanc. I should have gone with that, but I put some Deity on it, and it is, Mark. But we got some Seb Star or Seb. Well, hell, Clint, you're gonna have to help me. Seb, Clint's one that uses them. I can't remember what. I need to make a note of those. I need to order them first and foremost, because I've never really fooled with just rye or just wheat or done an all wheat or an all rye recipe, because it was so viscous like that. And it's just basically it's the same process as gelatinizing the corn, but it's just a different grain and it gelatinizes different. Sebflow, that's the word I was looking for, Sebflow. And Visco Seb. Is there a Seb Visco, or has it always been Visco Seb? What's going on, Mr. Parker? Good to see you, brother. Is there a Seb Visco? But anyway, it breaks up the gluten. So that's a gluten buildup, and it's kind of like gelatinizing corn. It thickens, and it's just a different type of starch. Gelatinizing. So a different, not I shouldn't say different type of starch, because it's just a different grain gelatinizing, because the starches are the same. It's the same amylo and amylopectin as all the other cereal grains and all the other grains and all the other starches basically, but they react differently right when you cook them. So instead of getting gelatinizing corn, you're gelatinizing the grain, and it instead of being a yellow goo, it's a clear goo. It's kind of a white clear goo. But yeah, it is a pain in the butt. But there's some enzymes that we use to help those, and Clint labeled those right there, the viscoseb and the sebflow. And those help a lot with it. And there's a glucanase too that will help with it. And I guess that's basically what those are, is a glucanase. Let me check it, sebflow. Yeah, sebflow HTL is a beta glucanase enzyme. Yeah, it's a glucanase. So any type of glucanase that you can use will help. And you can also get those beta glucanase naturally from the same grain. So if you use a malted, it'll help. If you use malt, it'll help with that. Or you can just get a regular, they have powdered and liquid glucanase that you can use as well. And that's what that sebflow is. And the other one, what was it? Viscoseb. So I need to get some, because I don't have any of those. But I'm going to try to do some, all grain. I'm going to do an all wheat vodka. So I want to get some of that to help with it. The viscoseb does have other enzymes. Good. Viscoseb. All right, so I'm going to put a little star by that one so I get that. But yeah, that's what the gumminess is the glucans building up in those grains, and that glucanase will definitely help with them. Well, yeah, last Wednesday, my modem went down at my website. My site didn't crash. My modem went down. We figured it yesterday or the next day. They came out and had a look at everything, and took a while to troubleshoot. Actually, I was on the phone that night for over an hour trying everything. Have you reset this? Did you restart your? I'm like, oh, man. I've been at this since they, had computers. And it was a bad modem that gone out. Before we get started, I will put some prayers out there for Jim Miles, who's recovering from his knee surgery. Michael Bowen, whose knees are also bad from a bad fall that he had, and Chad Grant and J.L. Shine, who went to the hospital last week. And happy birthday to J.B. Wagon Maker's birthday's this week, and Mr. David Dance's birthday this week. So hope y'all are doing good. And everybody's healing up well. And if y'all know anybody we need to pray for, just mention it in the chat, and we'll send out our prayers for them. And I'm hoping everybody has a good Thanksgiving. What all y'all have planned? I guess we're going to go to my sister. Oh, yeah, that's what I was talking about. We're going to my sister's in the morning. My dad, I don't think he can stand being in one place for a long time. And so we're going to, instead of doing evening, we're going to do a little brunch kind of thing. And that means that I get to come home and do her own thing. I don't know if we're going to cook a turkey or a ham or what at this point. Huh? Oh, hell. I mentioned that. I think I've been getting earaches, and I've been using my headphones a lot more than I have been. I think, man, I wonder if headphones can get infectious or, get dirty and bacteria build up on them. I'm thinking, I bet they do. And I don't need to listen to anything, so I'm going to take those dang things off. So I ain't using them. I've been putting little Kleenexes in between them and my ear. I know. I guess y'all wondering what the hell's that sticking out there. Mine. I put a little Kleenex to kind of separate my ear from the headphones so I wouldn't get earaches, man. I guess that's what I'm thinking it was, just bacteria in them damn headphones. I need to spray them down with something or wipe them down with something, then a bacterial wipe or something. So I don't want to get earaches, or it should go right to your brain. Earaches are dangerous. Ear infections are pretty dangerous to have. It's pretty close to the brain. You definitely don't want infections going to your brain. I'm gonna get a haircut. LD Carlson amylase. Yeah, they make some different types of amylase. I've got some LD. Actually, I think I've got some LD glucanase, um, beta glucanase. No. It's a glucoamylase. It's not glucanase. It's a little bit different, but yeah. LD Carlson makes good products. I've got quite a few of them. I buy a lot of that stuff. Their stuff. They make good nutrients. Their diammonium phosphate, their DAP is good. Fermax, Fermo, Fermade. They got some pretty good products. I buy quite a bit of LD Carlson stuff. Yeah, they got good stuff. Been buying them for years. They've got quite a few things from them. In fact, let me go look. I'll see what kind it is I've got. I've just got my box right in here. Be right back. Yep, it's gluco. What's going on, Roy? Good to see you, brother. White corn, rye, wheat, and barley. Man, that's awesome. Yeah. This is stuff I've had for a while, so I'm not throwing nothing away. I'm going to use it before I'm done. But I've had pretty good luck with the powdered, the gluco, but the powdered alpha is kind of it's picky. It's you got to use it at the right temperature. You got to maintain a pretty tight temperature range, and it doesn't do as good as the liquid. But I've got a bunch of the powder amylase alpha and a bunch of the powdered glucose. So till I'm done with them, I'm gonna use them. And I generally use both. I'll use about half and half of each, trying to stretch it out just because I'm too damn tight to throw that thing away. Even though I don't like it and it doesn't do that great, uh, I won't throw it away. I'll have to use it. I'm just too tight to. I hate throwing stuff away that I can use. So I don't know. I might just save it for a pinch, but it kind of denatures it. Shelf life is kind of limited on them. They're not forever. So I just try to use it as best I can. I'll use the liquid and then I'll throw a little bit in there. It just makes me feel better. I can't throw it away. Yeah, I always add some oats too, Clint. Yeah, I always throw a few handfuls in there. And if unless it's a 5 or 10% or something like that, I usually don't even count it, but I'll throw a few handfuls in there always just for the mouth feel and to soften things up. That sounds good, Roy. Roy makes good liquor. I've had the opportunity to drink some of Roy's. Maggie this year is the latest, I guess. I had some of Roy's. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good to see you here, brother. So yeah, I'm looking forward to tomorrow. I'm tired as can be, man. I'm hoping I don't nod off here I was about to fall asleep right after I ate dinner, sitting there watching TV, and I've been watching this Daryl Dixon. I don't know if y'all ever watched The Walking Dead when it was out, and I guess this is one of the spinoffs. So I guess Negan might have one of his, and I guess Daryl and Carol have a spinoff, and Daryl Dixon, and it's I guess they got a couple of seasons done, and we've been watching that. So I was sitting there watching that and about fell damn asleep, man. So I'm pretty tired. I keep that liquid in the refrigerator. Yeah, I keep it in the refrigerator. Now let's see. I would say probably a couple of years, but I'm gonna check and see, and it might vary based on the manufacturer and the source. Um, but mine didn't come with an expiration date, so I'm gonna look it up. I'm guessing a couple of years. It says 3 months, 6 months, 80% increased dosage after shelf life. So I guess it just kind of has a steady decline, and as it gets older, you just have to add a little bit more and more. And you definitely don't want to freeze it. This says most thermostable alpha amylases can maintain activity for 24 months as long as they're kept, in the range refrigerator temp. So that sounds about right, up to a couple of years. Yeah, that sounds about right. And even after they're expired, they still work. They're just less effective. So you may have to just use more. So, if you put them in there and you stir it up and it's just not thinning out like you're used to seeing, when it gelatinizes. And that's why I like a lot of people add it when they gelatinize at the same time. And I like gelatinizing mine and letting it get good and thick, and then adding, the amylase on top of that. That way you can watch and see how well it thins out. And if you need to add more, then, I've added the full dosage, and I'll throw in a little powder in there with it, when it drops down to 155, and try to help it along. But yeah, you can add more if it's not thinning out as well as it should. Then you probably have, that it's starting to lose a little bit of its effectiveness. So you just have to add a little bit more, and then, but it's best to use it up. I have some that's about 12 months old, so I need to. Actually, it's a little over 12. I got it last year at Maggie, and I got some this year at Maggie as well. So I need to start cranking out some grains. I'm gonna have to go get me some corn and start fermenting some grains and getting that going. Definitely need to do that. So I've got a big barrel to fill. Do you like to add gelatinize first at it? Yeah, I do too. I like it better that way because I never know how well my corn's gelatinizing if I add it at the very beginning. I've tried it both ways, and adding it at the very beginning, actually that's the way I did it when I first started, and I never did get a good gelatinization, and I guess it gelatinized fully, but I just didn't know it, and because I'd added it first, and it just kept thinning it, as it went. So yeah. Yeah, I think that's generally the rule. Is it may not ever. I guess it eventually, after many many years, it probably just not work anymore or denature. If it got too hot, that's for sure. If it gets hot, it'll denature. Those enzymes will. But that high temp, it take a lot to denature that shit. You know, that's kind of what the whole purpose of it is. But Yeah, I guess that powder did take 155 to denature it. It's not like a malt, you know. Um, doesn't take quite as much for a malt. I had a buddy of mine send me a picture of his malting it. Man, I'm so jealous. He's got a malting table, probably 30 feet long, 10 feet wide, covered in malt, man, malting some grains. Man, he's got it down, bro. If anybody got any questions, ask them now. We're going to start going over a little bit for beginners, but I don't know how many of the beginners we got from last week in here. If there's any, what's going on, Carpenter? I didn't see your poster. Yeah, I like to gelatinize it too. I mean, I like to have that after it gelatinizes. What's going on, Michael? All right, Anthony's back. Yeah, awesome. All right, so we're going to start a little bit, and if you have questions, y'all can ask them. Follow the chat. Uh, yeah, I agree with that. If you're doing a bunch, it'd probably be a good idea to help. You know, help, especially if you're doing 3+ per gallon. I've heard people say, "Oh, I do like 5 or 6 pounds per gallon." I'm like, I don't know. It's pretty thick. But yeah, I do about 2.5. I try to keep it down to there. Thank you, Nancy. I hope you do the same, dear. From North Kakalaki. Well, it's good to see you. I hope everybody has a good Thanksgiving too, you and yours, Nancy. Yeah, it's all barley. You know, it's feed grade is just the grain. It's barley. Yeah, you can malt it and use it the same. It's like corn. You know, people say, "Oh, can you use that food grade corn?" Well, you know, or feed grade corn, and it's just grain. You know, it's yeah. It depends on the drying process and how old it is. You know, and but yeah, you can definitely use it for sure. The only thing I've heard is somebody was asking me about they found a good deal on rye at Lowe's, and I'm like, Lowe's sells rye, and I'm like, damn. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, are you talking about the rye grass seed? Yeah, that rye. And I'm like, I don't think you're going to use that. Hey, it's probably pinch coated or has some kind of sprayed on uh, fertilizer, but yeah, that's not the same rye as what we use in our beverage making. But yeah, the barley be fine. You know, the feed grade barley's fine. Yeah, yeah, it might not be the same as a 6 row, or I'm not sure what the source, whether it's a 2 row, 6 row, what kind of barley it is, but um, yeah, yeah, wheat has the best. Wheat's has probably the highest diastatic power of all of them, malted wheat, but yeah, and you can, it's the same with the wheat. It's just a red winter wheat or a soft white wheat or um, yeah, yeah. It's barley as long as it doesn't, it's fine as long as it doesn't have anything sprayed on it or added to it. And, a lot of times with feed grade things, they add um, yeah, getting over 3, it'll definitely increase your gravity. Now, I found with about 2.5, I can get to 1070 and plus, with about 2.5. But if you want to get, 1080 or something like that, you're gonna have to use a little bit more. But if not, you can always throw in a little bit of dextrose or some corn sugar, corn syrup, and it's not too bad. But yeah, definitely with three, a little over three, you're definitely going to get your high gravity and get a little more increased production without that bite. Yeah. The malted wheat has one of the highest diastatic powers of all the grains. Yeah, you can use that to convert your corn just fine, just like a malted barley. In fact, now that we have the liquid amylase that a lot of people use, the 6 row, is becoming a little less popular because now you can use the 2 row, which has a little less diastatic power, but most say, I'm not going to say everybody, but most say, especially your beer makers, will say that your 2 row is going to have a little better flavor. So yeah, you can malt your wheat, you can malt rye, you can malt for sure the barley, but yeah, the wheat, the malted wheat, has some of the highest diastatic. And you need to look at the guides on malting it because it's a little different than corn. The radicle in corn is just one little shoot that comes out, right? And once it gets to about a eighth of an inch to a quarter of an inch, not quite a quarter, about an eighth, a little over, then you want to stop the process and dry it. And then, if you can tumble it and knock that little dry radicle off, it's best. Um, but with the wheat and the barley and stuff, it actually has like little fingers and stuff, a root, actually roots coming out instead of just one tap root. So there'll be a certain rate. See, what you want to do is when you malt your grains, you want to begin the malting process because that's what unleashes all the natural enzymes that are indigenous to that grain, right? So once they're activated, your indication that it's worked is that a little root will come out. And as soon as that little root comes out, you realize that you've converted all you've activated, I should say, not converted, activated is the best word. The enzymes in there, the natural endogenous, enzymes inside those grains. Once you've done that, you want to stop the process. So you don't want to heat it up too much, but you want to dry it as quickly as possible to stop that process because you don't want all those enzymes being, used up by the natural sugars that are in the grain or the endosperm inside that grain, and that's what feeds those enzymes, and that the enzymes converting the sugars or the endosperm inside that seed or grain is what fuels the growth of that radicle and the root starting to come out to get the plant started before it sends the shoot out, and it starts getting its energy from the sun then. So up until that point, it gets all of its energy from the enzyme and the endosperms within that grain. So you want to stop that process as soon as possible to maximize the amount of sugars and starches. The endosperm is just pure starch in there. You want to maximize those, and you also want to maximize the amount of your enzymes, your natural alpha and beta glucanase within that grain. So you want to maximize those. So as soon as you can stop that process, once they're activated, the better. That way you'll get the most amount per each grain, and you'll get a better conversion. Corn itself, if you malt your own corn, it doesn't have enough really to convert itself fully. So it's always, even if you have malted corn, you can get by with it. I mean, back in the day, they still distilled with it and ran it, but you're getting a 1040, 1050. It's a pretty low, starting gravity, and that was plenty for them. They didn't have to use that expensive sugar, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Well, for all time, sugar has always been a pretty expensive commodity, and still they started mass producing it and growing it, and uh, and the prices went down. But that hasn't happened to the last 100 years or so. So prior to that, it was pretty expensive. So a lot of people they would malt their grains and just go with malt and malt their corn, and whatever you got, because a lot of people, especially in Appalachia, didn't have access to a lot of malted barley and malted wheats and some of these other grains. They could get corn and grow their own corn, but there's pretty limited farmland in eastern Kentucky and in Appalachia in general because it's so mountainous. So they, they'd run that low gravity beer and still produce some alcohol, but a lot of times back then they'd have to run it twice. And then that's kind of when they came out with a thumper long, long, long ago. They wouldn't have to run it twice. They could just get that second distillation, pretty much from the thumper. And that was back in the days when the starting gravity was about 1040, 1050 tops. I guess 1050 is probably considered a great, fermentation or a great conversion with that malted corn. And yeah, oh yeah, yeah. It's still cheaper to, especially now that we have exogenous enzymes. If we still had to do the malting and go with malting and using all grains and malt to convert, it would probably be more expensive to try to do that than just the sugar. But with the malting process, it's difficult, time consuming, and it takes labor and hours and time and more product. So you can't just do an all corn with some exogenous enzymes that are real cheap. You're going to have to add more grains, and it increases the grain bill and it increases the cost. But definitely, with the exogenous enzymes like we have these days, it's much, much cheaper to convert corn to get your sugars than to try to add sugar, because you can get corn sugars once you convert them cheaper than you can buy it in the bags. And Mikey Frayne and I, we spent a lot of time and effort trying to calculate the costs and what kind of conversion and what you're getting out of it and what it costs. Much, much cheaper. And that's why all the ethanol that they create for gasohol has been from um, grains. You don't see them making sugar gasohol. So it's definitely something that's gonna. Let's see here. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, it's definitely more expensive. Definitely, and it's cheaper just to get all your sugars from there. Uh, just a second. Just okay. All right. So yeah, it's yeah, multi-grains is very expensive. That's why I'm saying it's most of the people, if they do get it, they try to malt it themselves. That's why I had that huge malting table. But yeah, it's getting wheat's pretty cheap if you know a farmer that has it. Barley, I've not had a chance to find any farmers locally that has barley. So, oh, you've had a stuck fermentation. Okay, could be several things. Check the temperature to make sure the temperature's, mid 70s to mid 80s, somewhere in that range, depending on your yeast. I think you said that you had a dry yeast, or that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to translate your comments so I could figure out what you were talking about, but you're using an active dry yeast. So probably close to, 80, is probably a good medium temperature. Um, yeah, I did. So I would try to check your temperature, make sure it's close to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Check your pH to make sure that it's 4.5 to 5.5, somewhere in that range would be fine. And if those are okay, and you had enough sugar to start with, then you might need to check and try some different yeast. I was talking about that at the very beginning of the show. I've got some apple going right now, and I threw in some EC1118. It's getting some time on it now. Also, you want to store your yeast in the refrigerator, so it's best kept in the fridge so you can, keep it fresh longer. You can freeze your yeast, but if you do freeze it, make sure that you let it thaw out completely before you use it. Or if you try to use it, go from frozen to dumping it in the water, it generally doesn't, it's not as effective. So, but I would say, it could very well, if your temperatures are in range and your pH is in a decent range, um, and you've got, you started with enough sugars. I'm not sure if this is a conversion or exactly what, or if you've got your starches all converted to sugars that the yeast can consume, because a lot of times when we test for sugars with our hydrometers, and it doesn't tell, refractometers, it doesn't tell us whether or not it's a fermentable sugar or not. It just tells us that the sugars are present based on the density of the mash or wash. So could be the yeast. I started mine with the EC1118, and I started made a starter in the jar, and it foamed up good and everything. So I thought, well, it was perfectly viable. So I dumped it on in there, and 2 days I wasn't getting anything. So I'm like, well, that shouldn't be. I checked my temperature, and it was a little on the low side, but for an EC1118, 75 isn't a big problem. Um, and You don't have any issues. They say, I don't know for most things, but for like wine, it probably be, they say to let it thaw before you use it. I've not taken it directly from the freezer to to spreading it, or pitching it, but I have gone from the freezer to the refrigerator to, let it go for a while. But yeah, I think he's got some active dry yeast. So yeah, I would say that, you know, try some different yeast, would be the third option, because generally it's temperature, pH, not having enough sugars to ferment, or not converted sugars, or the yeast. It's generally got to be one of those four. Or if you're using a juice or something, you might want to check your label and make sure that there's not some kind of uh, you know chemicals in there, to preservatives and those things that will kill the yeast. Right, a lot of these preservatives were designed to kill yeast and bacteria that builds up, and fungus, which is yeast is. So if you don't, those are usually the things that cause it. So it's usually got to be one or the other. So go through, check your temperature, um, check your pH level. If it's a grain conversion, make sure that you got fermentable sugars. Make sure you've got a good grain conversion. You can use the iodine test to see if there's still starches present. And if you get still starches present, then you probably didn't get a great conversion. So you might just try to add some sugar, at this point. It might be a little bit late to try to recook it and do all that. I guess you could though, um, but yeah, there's they got on some corns and stuff. They've got acids that they preserve it with, propionic acids on the grains. And but like in fruit juices, if you're using juices, and to make like a wine and making a wash, or I'm not sure exactly what you got fermenting, but there's a lot of preservatives, and I guess the propionic would be like a ascorbic acid. It's just another type of preservative, but this actually preserves the outside of the corn husk and makes it look nice and presentable and shiny, and helps, I guess, in shelf life as well. So they spray on a lot of the corn and stuff gets sprayed with that. But if it's not one of those, then definitely going to be trying some different yeast, and which is what I had to do. And so I put some deity on it, and I'm not sure that I like the deity with the fruits. I'm used to using wine. I've got some Premier Blanc, Red Star Premier Blanc. I should have used that, but it was a brand new thing, and I didn't want to open it, and that daddy sitting out there on top. So I just figured, yeah, I'll just use this deity yeast, and that's right, Roy. And so I use some of that deity, and I'm getting a little bit of sulfury smell to it. So I don't know. I increased the temperature. It's up to 80, because I know the deity yeast like it. And so some of the other yeast in there, the EC1118, may just start getting active, and it's probably not going to like the 80. So, they're having it's a little bit stressed, and I can tell by the smell that it's going through some stresses, but that's all right. I've got a new column coming in. A lot of this stuff I'm just running a bunch. I'm going to make a bunch of neutral, and I've got some old wine that I need to run, and I've got some watermelon china. It was horrible, that I'm going to neutralize, and I'm going to neutralize a lot of those old wines that are no longer that good, old fruit wines, and so I'm going to run a lot of those and just kind of neutralize them and use those for post flavoring. But let's see here. We've got some beginners in here, so I hope we answered your question there. And if you're not sure what we're talking about, just keep asking, brother. But I had to go into the translator there to see what you were saying on your first question. It didn't automatically translate it for me. So, but I did get that meant. Let me make sure. Instant yeast, yeah, instant yeast. Yeah. You do too, huh? Now, a lot of those fruit wines, I've got some in there like 3 or 4 years old. I just hadn't had a chance to drink them, and they've just gotten, they're not that great anymore. Like my plum wine, I've got some plum wine in there that's going on 4 years old now, and it's not that good. Now the grape wine is just fine. It's good, but some fruits they don't age well. It's not they're not all wine or is like grape wine. It doesn't all get better with time. Like a lot of your fruit wines. After they say the best time to drink them is like 9 months to a year and a half, in that range, and then after a year and a half, 2 years, depending on the fruit now. But a lot of them start degrading in flavor, and so you want to start out with a simple sugar wash. Right. With the wine, yeah, I've had some that get cloudy and you know, and it depends. Are you using mostly fruit, or are you doing fruit and juice? I like to a lot of mine. I'll add some Welch's juice to mine. I do the 100%, and then there's a store brand I get that's 100% juiced. It doesn't have any of the preservatives in it, so it's good to use. But I try to supplement my fruits with sometimes with the juice because it's just so expensive just to do fruit juice, right? Um, but just time. I mean, just letting them sit in that secondary fermentation for long periods of time under the airlock, and just keep watering that airlock. And if you get a little buildup in the bottom, once it gets a certain depth, you can rack it off again, into another fermentation vessel. I use the big 5-gallon plastic, water bottles with the number 10 stopper and the airlock. A lot of people would, say, oh, that's, barbaric. You have to use glass. It's horrible and all this. But I've never had any bad flavors from that plastic. It works well. Um, Fruit only. That's awesome. Yeah, for me it gets a little bit expensive. I mean, if you're a winery, you have your own and you grow your own, so you have plentiful amounts. But for me, I don't. Thinning agents, and I've heard them use egg whites to help settle it out. I know during cold weather you can do what's called cold crashing. You can leave that wine or put it in the freezer or put it in a cold area, and yeah, it's interesting. It's clouding up on you like that, especially wine. Now, I know a lot of places use rice husks to help thin and filter. Um, but cold crashing, if you have the ability to cold crash on a rack in between racks and on your final rack, if you want to rack it into something and cold crash it, put it, it's just above freezing, and that cold temperatures help, force things to settle down quicker, and it's called cold crashing, and that helps. But a lot of times too, with some of the fruits, especially I get a little bit of that with my white wine. And are y'all using potassium metabisulfate to stop fermentation, or potassium sorbate to stop it before you add? Yeah. Do y'all use the potassium sorbate and metabisulfate too? That can sometimes create a little bit of the powder effect in there, and it takes a while for that stuff to settle out. And do yeah, that could very well be what it is. I use that too, and it just where it goes in as a powder. It takes a while for that, it gets in suspension, and it takes a bit for that to settle out. So just increase the rack times before you go to bottle. Is like, what were y'all using, grapes, or what kind of fruit? Y'all do a lot of different fruit wines. No, he's talking about winemaking, Clint. They're not distilling. Yeah, different fruits, and sometimes just the fruit in itself, will have certain things in suspension, and a lot of times some of your finest bottles of wine, especially those that have sat for a while, they'll have sediment in the very bottom. That's why a lot of times, they'll store some champagnes and stuff upside down, and when they take the top off that bottle, they'll literally take the top off the bottle to bypass all those sediments. So in most of your wine that's aged, and some of this stuff like 10 years old wine, even some of the finest wines in the world are going to have sediments, and that's why when they pour it a certain way, they try to be real careful in handling it and stuff before. Rhubarb wine's good wine, yeah. And so it's some of your finest wines are going to have sediments, and that's to the maturity of the not only the wine but of the individual drinking it. A lot of people see that and they're like, ooh, ooh, it's got floaties or it's got sediment. Ooh, it's not good. No, it's not true at all. Some of the best wines in the world, come from France. Um, have sediments over time. It's just the nature of the beast, and you can't get away from it. You'll always have it, and I've got it in some of my old bottles. Um, yeah, I make my dry wine. I make a champagne that's blanc, and I mean just as brute as you can get. It's dry as dry can be, and it's a strawberry champagne. And I mean, man, you can drink it. It'll pucker you up quick, man. It'll dry you out, and it's real dry, and there's absolutely no sugar at all in it, but it has a good strawberry flavor. And the bottles where I get my wine bottles from, I get them from a restaurant and a bar, and they save me their wine bottles, and I clean them up real good, boil them, and reuse them because they're expensive to buy. And I do the strawberry champagne basically like you would do any fruit. I use the Red Star Premier Blanc yeast in it, and I ferment it dry, and it's got some sugar. Of course, you have to add some sugar to it because strawberry juice alone, it doesn't have a lot of sugars. The strawberries don't. So I add sugar to it, and it basically the same way you would do a wine, except I don't use the potassium metabisulfate or the potassium sorbate to kill the yeast off. I let it continue, and it makes it a sparkling wine. So unless if you kill that yeast off, then it won't. But inside the bottle, when it goes in there, it's still got a little bit of active yeast, so it builds up pressure. And when you pop that top off, it'll foam just like a champagne, and it's made with strawberries, and it's pretty good stuff. But I'd say, now what's the gravity of it when you make it? Because I know the rhubarb's not a real high sugar, fruit. In fact, let me see if it's on my chart. I don't know if rhubarb's even on my fruit chart. Let's see. I may have a chart here for you. Let's see. Let me put these comments away. I don't know if rhubarb's on here or not. If it was, it'd be towards the bottom. Um, uh, let me open it up and separately and see what I got here in my file. I don't think it doesn't have it on there. Yeah, let's see, man. I would say it's probably towards the middle, though. In fact, let me do a quick check on that. I can answer much. Yeah, not a whole lot. Doesn't give me, okay, 3.5 per 100 gram. Yeah, it's not very high on the chart at all. Ten or 11%. That's good. That's like a close to a 1080. I think 1080 is like 12. So This is a 107 and change, so 107.5. So that's good. Yeah, it's dry though, man. This stuff is dry, man. It is very dry. But I tell those girls, man, there's no sugar in it at all. It's very dry and it's low calorie. Gluten free. Start saying all these things that they like it more for that reason. Well, that's nice if you can get that kind of now with rhubarb. These are all just natural sugars, so you don't have to use any amylase. I don't think there's any starch in there, is it? Yeah, I don't think there's any starches in it. Is there in the stalk, or is this just now when you process it? Do you run it through a roller like you would a sugar cane, or do you press it just in the same grape press that you use for grapes? So I'm curious because I've never processed rhubarb. So see, this is now I'm learning tonight. See, that's good. That's why we're all helping each other. But yeah, I'm definitely into you chop it into small pieces and mesh bags. Okay. Now I'm gonna have to check. Is there any starches? Yeah, there's not any starches. I didn't think so to speak of. That's interesting. Yep, very cool. So you don't even you're not pressing. You just chop it up. You drop the juices in it and let the. I guess it steeps. Interesting. Cool. Very cool. And you mix that with a little bit of water to helps steep the. Or do you just use the rhubarb natural juices and stalks? That's so I'm interested because I've never done rhubarb, but it sounds definitely intriguing. Sugar and water. Okay. Cool. Awesome. That sounds good, man. I definitely like to try that sometime. Now, do you all sell nationwide or Total Wine? Can I go to Total Wine and get some of this or what? Yeah, it definitely sounds good. And y'all use the EC 1118 or oh, I didn't say it. It was Clint said that was. And the strawberry is done the exact same way. Oh, just upstate New York. Damn. I was, my brother's up there. I'll have to get him to send me one. But yeah, the strawberry you'll do the same way. Just mulch it up and small pieces and add water. I generally add like hot water to it to kill off anything, any wild yeast or anything. Um, oh yeah, sorry. Gotta remind me of these things. But yeah, that's definitely interesting. I've not done the rhubarb. I know it makes great pies and so yeah, just do your strawberry the same exact way and use your hydrometer to adjust your sugar levels to what you need because it depends on the ripeness of the strawberries, depending on what kind of sugar levels they're going to have. But yeah, definitely got to try that for sure. Well, I appreciate you helping us there, sir. Smokes a lot. I used to smoke a lot more than I do now. I smoked a lot in '96. I sure did. I don't smoke as much as I used to. I've had to cut back and start getting my age. You can feel it in the next, I'm not talking about cigarettes either. So, but yeah, the next day you can start feeling it in your lungs and stuff. So I've had to cut way back. And they say, oh, do the dabs. Try the dabs. That won't hurt your lungs at all. Okay. Shit, man, that just tore my head up, man. I'm used to smoking like low percentage weed. I grew up on all that low percentage stuff, and now all this high stuff, man, it's crazy. Yeah, I just throw them in at any time since you're not relying on the enzymes, Roy. You can throw them in any time. Wow. So y'all got a big farm. Yeah, I was thinking that hillbilly. I was thinking, strawberry rhubarb's a good combo. Yeah, my grandmother used to do a lot of with rhubarb. She grew a little rhubarb, um, and they did pies and stuff. 11,000 plants. That's a lot of work. So it looks like, I guess, like grows like celery, right? I remember my grandparents having it and growing it, but I don't remember seeing it. I remember the gooseberry bush a lot because those were the most bitter berries ever. Um, yeah, I tried the dabs and the shatter, man. It was just crazy. Yeah, yeah, the dabs and the shatter were just too much. I remember the first time I smoked the dabs, and I was in an area I'd lived for 20 some years, and I got lost on the way home. Yeah, I was stone, man. Oh, that's even better. Yeah, yeah. I used to do a lot of the flower, and it just got to where when you get old. I had to quit smoking a long time ago. I quit smoking cigarettes about 10 years ago, but I didn't give up weed, and I've had to cut way back. And then everybody, oh, try dabs, try dabs. You won't hurt your lungs at all. It just takes just a little bit. And I'm like, okay. And shoot, man, it took my head off, man. Like I said, I got lost on the way home, and it was in an area I'd lived for over 20 years. Oh, probably about almost 30 years. Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, the last I ever grew was Girl Scout cookies, and it was a nice plant. It was produced 3.8 pounds of just the colas, um, but that wasn't bad for one plant. 3.8 pounds of cola buds, and I bent it over so it didn't know what was the main cola. So it was just every branch grew up like it was a main, and and it produced real well. I did the scrog netting and all that. You never done any distillation? Well, you can. The best thing you can do, is some of your wines, if they just don't turn out well, is distill it. Instead of just dumping it, distill it, and you can make some decent brandy out of some bad wine and recover it. That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome, man. Good medicine, for a lot of people. But I know that high potency stuff. So I used to smoke. I started smoking back in the mid '70s. When I was young. And I guess a lot of the stuff back then was 6, 8%. Wasn't very strong. And you get high. It was perfect, great little buzz. Mellow out, get Chinese eyes, and get the munchies, and get thirsty. And it's like nowadays it's you it I don't know if they've bred a lot of the chemicals out by selectively breeding to increase the THC, but it seems like it's just too much, and I don't get any of those old feelings at all anymore. What's going on, John? Organic and outside, huh? That's one thing that's really, you know, the cost. A lot of, it's great to invest in a lot of this, but and we have hemp here in Kentucky, and it's all great and fine, but when you grow indoors, you out here, brother? Well, hang around, man. We're getting ready to go over the basics of distilling. So if you want to learn how to distill, it'd be a good time. Or come back and watch it like most people do later as you get a chance to. But either way, we appreciate you coming on and giving us some of your insight on your rhubarb wine. I definitely look forward to trying some of that. Yeah, I thought you were talking about 10,000 rhubarb plants. I'm like, man, that's a lot of fucking rhubarb. So I was thinking y'all did wine commercially, not weed. But either way, that's still a lot of work. Yeah, I'm definitely going to try some. I'm going to go into my wine or my liquor store and see if they've got any rhubarb wine. I've not had any rhubarb wine. I've had the pie, and I like the pie. But I'm going to definitely have a look. Appreciate you coming in, man. We're on here every Wednesday and Saturday, so drop in and. But if you can watch this show later, because I'm going to go over the basics of distilling. So if you want to learn how to distill some of your wines, if you, like I say, if you get something that just gets real old, I'm all right. Well, give us a name. We don't mind. You can, if it name the winery, so I can. I've got a brother that lives up in New York. He may be able to find me some for Christmas. So what's the name of the wine and the company, and I can see if he can get me some. Yeah, it is getting about that time, Mark. I appreciate that. Because yeah, there's Greg Winery for rhubarb. Awesome. Yeah, I have my brother look at it. Now I think he lives in New York City, so hopefully they can get it in New York City, right? Or is that just upstate only? What's going on, Monty? Good to see you, brother. All right. I just noticed that. Let me see if I can sneak in this. Yeah. And let's see. 1 second, Monty. Let me do this so I can get rid of this window. I got too many windows open right now. Yeah. 1 second. Wow, it took that long. That took a while, man. Damn. I tell you, the mail's slow. Chris, it took Chris almost 3 or 4 weeks to get his. He was like, "Man, are you sure you sent him? You sure you got the address right and all this?" I'm like, "Hell yeah." He's like, "Well, some people are saying you shafted me." And I'm like, "Brother, you know me better than that." And sure enough, I sent him another pair out, and and it got in like the day after I sent it. So he sent those back to me. But yeah, it's weird how that's slow, man. That took weeks. And some people get it in like 5 days, and some people 2 or 3 weeks. Man, that's horrible. I might start writing down the date when I ship them. I'm just saying slow. I was talking about patches for those that are wondering what we're talking about. Definitely check you out, brother, for sure. And thanks for stopping in and educating us on rhubarb. Man, I definitely look forward to trying some of that. I might have to get him to go up there and find some upstate. All right. Well, if you want to come back and rewatch this stream, you can kind of pick it up about halfway, and we're going to start talking about distilling for beginners, and we're going to go over a few basic stills that are pretty inexpensive and easy to start with, and get you a decent, yield at the same time. That's a good idea, man. We're time-sensitive material. That always does it, doesn't it? But yeah, I'm sending this with tracking and insurance, so you'd think that it'd get there a little damn quicker. But yeah, it took Chris probably over 3 weeks for him to get his, and it's like, damn, bro. And I sent him another set out, and I figured they'd gotten lost, or I figured they got delivered to a neighbor or something like that, and he had some shitty neighbors that just threw it in the garbage or just kept it, which happens because they rarely lose a big piece of mail like that. Yeah, they do, don't they? That's a fact. That is a fact. 11/19. Is that when I sent it out? Let's see. Is time that slow? Man, maybe I just don't have a concept of time. I thought it was like 2 weeks ago. Oh, no. That was Frank I sent out October 3rd. I was thinking it was yours, but it was Frank's. Yeah. All right. Well, that wasn't too bad then. Let's see, the 19th. That sounds about right on a Wednesday. Yeah. I can't believe that was a week ago, man. It seems like so much longer ago. Okay, let's see. Maybe. Okay, yeah, I shipped it out today. There it is to my messages, 19th. Man, time does. It seemed like a lot longer than that. Maybe it's just my old mind. Hello, Miss Lisa. How are you? That's a fact. That's just right on the outside. Don't mind me. This is just junk mail. It'll be there tomorrow. So what'd you think about those? Pretty good quality patchwork, isn't it? I can't believe how the AR-15, the way they stack the threading to give it a 3D effect, because it's got like built up threads where it should be wider, and man, it's amazing how the kind of detail that those have, man. It's because instead of just, they could easily just sew it on there with just one little run, right, and have it look just like an AR-15. But this thing has like the receiver built up, and it's top work. It's definitely top quality work. Oh yeah. Time for a sippy sip. Now this at 140. that I took a big go drink of last week, man. I was thinking it's 100 proof or 90 or 80 or something like that, and I took a big old swig of it, and it's 145. It says 140. Yeah, yeah, it's definitely expensive to try to ship a lot of your grains and stuff. It gets costly. You gotta definitely gotta try to find you a farmer close by, or when you're in the vicinity, or you're coming by field billies or coming by somebody that's got it, and you're driving around, and fill that trunk up before you go home, man, so you don't have to pay for that. Yeah, it's expensive. Yeah, that hickory white's good stuff. Mix that with a little Jimmy Red and Ohio Blue. Make you some of that Independence Day shine. The old red, white, and blue. Freedom shine. There we go. But Bragg Winery, we'll have to check him out. Yeah, I like when people pop in like that and offer some insight and help. All right, well, we got some beginners on here. Let's talk a little bit about yeah, it's a little different, field corn and sweet corn. It's different. Really? Well, that's good to know. I'm gonna have to make a note of that. Um, do they offer insurance and everything? That's good. Man, you just need to get you a little bit of that Ohio Blue, and you can make some freedom shine. Can make shine great again. As your standard. I've never shipped with them, but I want to make sure that Phil Billy. Oh, this is the company as your standard. Okay. For a minute there, I was thinking as your standard was a company that shipped just the corn to you from there, but now I'm seeing that it's the actual company, and I guess they just have a deal worked out to lower their shipping rate. But definitely, do they have barley? I can get all the corn and wheat I need here. I just need barley. Let's see what they got. Oats, wheats, popcorn, oats, Kiona, spelts, barley. They do have whole barley organic at 90 cents a pound. That's a good deal if it ain't gonna cost too much to ship. I've been paying close to 2 for mine. Yeah, they got a pretty good price, but I'll have to check that out later for sure. Oh, that's fine. I don't mind that at all. I just can't, I don't have any source of barley. I can go to a brew store and get it, but it's more expensive there than Amazon, and I get it on Amazon a little over, about 210, 220 a pound, uh, malted. But I don't know if they have malted barley. Yeah, I guess that's malted myself. Yeah, that's not bad. I'll check him out later. Yeah, that helps a lot. Good to know. All right, so back to the beginners. So for beginners, we're going to look at a few things tonight. We're going to start with the still, and you really need to kind of break down exactly what you want to distill. And most people will do what they drink, and if you drink vodka and pretty much like a neutral spirit, then you're going to be geared towards maybe a pot still with a column. Or if you prefer whiskeys and brandies and not really interested at all in the higher proof vodkas and higher proof distillates, then you use a different head on your pot still, a different cap. So instead of a column, you're just going to have a regular cap. And one of the best, well, we got two really the best type still for beginners and for cheap. Now, this is not a $2,000 copper still, which I don't recommend for beginners. I recommend beginners before you even know if you're going to like the hobby or get into it or not. A lot of times it's best not to have too much money invested. If you got plenty of money and you want the best, then by all means get copper. It's going to have a little more maintenance to it, and you will get a little superior heating, more even heating, and probably a little better sulfite removal than just stainless alone. But we found that, like in this still here, you see this little football cap on the top of it there. You can fill that up with a copper mesh, a pure copper mesh. And that copper in the vapor path is plenty good enough to remove the sulfites that are in there. If you pack enough and they're packed tightly, you can remove as much sulfites as most of your steel parts that would be copper would, maybe most likely even more. So, something like this is a good cheap alternative. Black Friday's coming up. I haven't checked Bever's site yet, but I know a couple of years ago, Home Depot was selling the 18.5 gallon um, water distillation systems for $150, and that's normally they're about 230 to 250 for this setup here. And everything you get here is everything you need to get started. So you can grab this, you can put it on a turkey fryer, or you can put it on your stovetop, and you can be distilling that day after you clean it up real good and run some boiling water through it and make sure that you get all the dirties and nasties and germs and anything else that might be built up in there out. Then you should be pretty good. I recommend, getting a rag and getting some isopropyl alcohol and really giving a lot of elbow grease and rub these insides of these pots and the lids down real well, because a lot of times there's some buffing compounds and some manufacturing greases and oils and stuff still, residuals on there. And so if buff it out, I mean, rub it real hard, and you'll notice if you use a white cloth, you'll start seeing some gray on there. And I think that's buffing compound and greases, because these pots are stamped out with a big, hydraulic press. It just comes down and boom, it just stamps them out. So, there's a lot of greases on that head, right, that come down, and they cleaned up for the most part, but, there's a lot of heat, friction, temperature, and buffing compounds to polish. So as much of those as you can get out, it's less that you're going to have to worry about in your distillate, especially your first run or two. This isn't like copper, where you would really need to run a sacrificial run, but I would still do that just to be on the safe side. Now, they say, run it with just water. So boil it, clean it, run it out. I would do that last. First, you could run some vinegar through it. And people say, "Oh, this is all stainless," but there's certain things that acid are solvents to acid, right? That acid will break down solutes, So if you run some vinegar through it, be good, and then follow up with some water to clean it out, and then do a sacrificial run. You could do, like somebody was asking earlier, about a sugar shine, and we're gonna cover that real quickly and go over. That's the most basic and easy to do. I shouldn't say easy, because a lot of times we get stuck, but that's one of the easiest things. And then we'll do a grain, simple grain fermentation too. But yeah, you can. Well, that, or you can just take this lid off, Clint. There's a tri clamp right here on the lid, and it's a 2.5. So you get a 2.5 to 2 reducer, and you can just take this football off, put that reducer on, and then run any kind of 2-inch column that you want, or any size column you want. If you want to get a concentric adapter to reduce or enlarge, I'm going to be running a 4-inch on mine. It's 18.5 gallon or 13 gallon. You can get them all the way down to 5. I'm not sure if the footballs go that low, but 13 gallon to an 18.5 gallons, a pretty good, volume to start with. It's enough to make it worth your trouble, but not enough to where you're going to have a lot of excess alcohol to deal with. And it's like, wow, you only need to run this once a year, and I've got all the alcohol I need. So yeah, I try to do the same, Clint, with all of them, whether it's copper or not, because the acid will break down certain things that other things don't. Water will, things that aren't soluble in acid might be soluble in water. And then if you do your final run with alcohol in a sacrificial run, certain things may be, broken down by alcohol that sugar or that vinegar and water just don't touch, right? So that'll cover any kind of manufacturing greases and things like that. But I still, even after doing all that, I took some isopropyl and scrubbed down the inside of my steel there, and I got a lot of gray. So I'm assuming that's a rubbing compound or a polishing compound that was on there. And so you definitely want to get those off, especially after the news we got a few weeks back about some of these stainless polishes having a compound in it that's pretty toxic, that just got added to the list, and had been used as a stainless steel polish for quite some time. I posted that in the DIY page, and if you want there and the militia, it'd probably be a little easier to scroll back in the DIY page. And look, I posted a newspaper article about it, and it lists the compound's name, but it's in some of your stainless polishes, which is one of the reasons I put it in there, because some people may be using that polish. But this is called a Bever football steel. It has a horrible reputation because people comparing it to the 3-pot Bevers that had their issues, with gaskets and undersized, condensers and thumpers that basically were, just catch and puke, basically. But they got a pretty bad rep. But this is a little bit different. This still doesn't have those gaskets to deal with. The only gasket in it is a lid gasket, and it's a silicone gasket. So if you take good care in how you handling it and cleaning it, should get years of use out of it. But it's a great little startup. Also, this I don't think I have a picture of the old beer keg. Let's see if I can find a beer keg with a little column on it. Here we go. I guess that's a fairly common, yeah. That's a fairly common looking column. I'd like to put something up there that doesn't have a, there we go. I don't want any brand names or advertise anybody. So there's the Vever, and those are about $2.30 on 18.5 gallon versions, and the 13s aren't a lot cheaper. They're like $2.15. So yeah, I was going to say keg steel is a great. It's 15 gallons, and so this is just a few gallons more and quite a bit more expensive, unless you get the keg with the extra ferrules that have been welded on, and sometimes on the side they'll weld ferrules for electric, so you can run it on electric. You could have that welded onto one of these as well. But let's see here. Let me throw that picture I just saved into my files here. Okay, so you can either go that route or this route. And this is just your old standard beer keg with a column that you can buy off Hillbilly or a whole host of other places, a lot of other sellers, and a lot of your steel builders and stuff will also sell these parts for kegs. But you can have kegs welded, get you 2-inch ferrules welded in the side of it for elements, for like water heater elements. But it's best to use the stainless ones instead of the water heater ones. But yeah, Anthony, did you get the football? Yeah, those both right there. Both of these steels right here are the best steels ever for a beginner and an intermediate. And really all you need until you want to increase your production. That would be the only reason really to graduate from one of these, because it's basically, a keg, probably the most heavy duty cooking pot that you'll ever encounter. Very, very solid built. The good thing about these are you take this column off and wrap those up and put them in a box with some packing material, keep them safe, and just let the keg sit there, and when somebody sees it, it's a beer keg. It's an old beer keg sitting over there. Yeah, Phil's a great guy. You'll not meet a finer person than Phil, that's for sure. He's a great guy with a big heart. That's what I just ordered, a 4-inch column for mine. It's one of the 4-inch 4 bubble plate, all glass, nice. But I just ordered one, and so that's going to sit on I've got kegs and I've got bevers. So, but yeah, if both of these make great pots. Now this pot is a little thinner. This is a much this keg is much more solid, heavy duty, something you can throw in the back of the truck and not worry a bit about, scratch it up. Who gives a shit? It's you can find them everywhere, for 35, 45 bucks. Once you start getting ferrules welded into the side and extra large ferrules welded into the top, then the price goes up pretty quickly, because getting somebody to weld that and paying a welder is not cheap. So then you gotta, you gotta pay, a little extra to have those welded on. But yeah, I agree. It's two of the best ways to go. Now for this column and for just that keg, it's 35 to 55 bucks, and that column's going to cost you about 150 bucks too. So it's a couple of hundred, two and a quarter, 250, and you're going to be about the same price as you are in your Bevers. You're going to have a heavier duty steel here, but this one is a little bit easier to take the top off and clean, which was my issue when I used to use a keg for many, many, many years. I used a keg steel. And, then I didn't have anybody to weld me a big 4-inch ferrule in the top. So you get in there and scrub it and clean it, and keep it clean. I had to go to a car wash, and spray it out. I had no pressure washer. I couldn't afford that shit. So I had to go to the car wash and spray it out, and kind of keep it clean that way. Because, it was, you couldn't just take a garden hose and angle it in there and just get it good. Nowadays, on a pressure washer, they got these rotary, heads that shoot water out the side that you can go in and out, man, and have it clean in the heartbeat. But yeah, you can't beat a keg steel or this little Vever for a beginner. Those are definitely the two routes to go. Durability with your keg. It kind of camouflages when it's alone in the corner sitting there. It's just no beer keg. It doesn't look like a steel. Where if you have that sitting in the corner, what's that interesting looking pot with that football head on it? That raises some eyebrows. But you see a keg sitting in the corner, and of course you keep these parts, the stainless parts, in a box, and oh boy, everybody's gonna think anything. I guess, if you took the football and all that off, you could just say, I use mine as a pressure canner, and you can I've got a little fitting on the top of mine. They make a 2.5 inch that can stop this, and you drill it and tap it out and put your little pressure gauge in there, and one of those little weights that spin to let the pressure out, so you can adjust your pressure. It makes a good little pressure boiler, pressure canner. So, take that football off, and it kind of disguises itself too. Whereas if you got a big old copper steel sitting in the corner, man, you just kind of hard to say that's something other than what we all know what it is. So so it it doesn't matter whichever one's. Now the 15-gallon keg, you're going to be able to run about 13 gallons in. As they say, it's about a 15.5. So you can run about 13.5, 14 max, because you don't want to puke. But having this little sight glass down here, you can put your copper mesh inside there to keep an eye on things. And you can also make sure look in this glass to see that you're not puking up, and that it's good, clear vapors that are coming out, and not getting a lot of puke. If it is, to dial your temperature back a little bit, right? So, but in answering the question, length of the column below the deflag keg with a 4-inch, yeah, and those are nicer. To have one with a 4 inches is definitely much nicer. I've got on mine, it's got like a 2-foot column. They call it spools, but a stainless spool, and it's like 2 foot below the deflagmator, and I can adjust the water flow in my deflagmator and get it up to about 187 without it getting real cold. I'm sure I could get it probably a little bit higher in the 190s by it getting colder. But when you do that, you're compressing, a lot of heads, tails, depending on when you start deflagmating. I usually try to not do turn my deflagmator on until I'm past my heads and forwards and heads. For that reason, I don't want to compress those back in. But yeah, I've got like about a 2-foot little glass, and I have a sight glass on there. You can stack sight glasses if you want to, and it makes it look pretty, and it gives you something to look at. And you can also adjust your deflegmator, a lot easier when you have stacked sight glasses and you got a little bit of mesh, copper mesh in each of them. It's kind of like bubble plates, but it's not. But you can adjust your deflegmator and keep that kind of that liquid there in the middle where it dances a lot. So you've got your hot vapor coming up and then your cold condensation coming down, and they kind of meet in the middle and form a flux, kind of an equilibrium. And you want to kind of dial it to where it does that. If it's too hot, if you're running it too hot, your vapors will push up higher and your equilibrium will be higher. If your defleg's too cold, you're condensing too much and your equilibrium will be lower. So if you can kind of keep it in the middle, that tends to, and it really depends on what you want too. So not one or the other is right or wrong. It's just how you want to adjust it and how you want to get proof out of it. If you want to increase your proof, you want to increase your condensation. Therefore, you have colder water going in, and your equilibrium will be down low. And if you have your equilibrium higher up, that means you got more vapor coming in, and you'll end up getting a little bit more flavor that way, or in the middle, kind of a combination of the two. So that's how you kind of adjust your deflegmator to load the plates or load the mesh if that's all you have. Right. Right. And that's why I have 24-inch pool. But mine's just 2-inch. Now I've got a 4-inch with bubble plates. So that'll definitely help. But I don't have a 4-inch deflegmator. I'm gonna be going 2-inch into 4 and then 4 back into 2. And hopefully I think I'll be able to adjust it enough and keep the water cool enough to neutralize everything. And that's the whole reason I'm getting it, is to make neutrals with. Um, I'm not chasing the proof or trying to, anything like that. It's just that when I get something like that watermelon or some old wine that's just not good and it's not going to be a good distillate, I can clean that shit up and make use of it instead of dumping it out. Like a lot of people just dump it out. It's the horrible, that's about all that watermelon shine I made would be worth it. Horrible. I hated it. But, it's, so I can clean it all up and, save a few gallons of liquor there. Right. Yeah. Reflux to vapor ratio. And, there's no right or wrong. High or low just depends on what proof you're shooting for. But I will say that when you do use that deflegmator, let me get that out of the way so you can see that better. When you do use the deflegmator, try to use it to where you can adjust your temperature water going into it. I've got a hot and a cold that go into a Y on a little valve, a needle valve, and gate valves are fine, but you don't want to use the ball valves because that's kind of all or nothing kind of thing. So use a needle valve or a gate valve where you can kind of adjust your warm and cold water going into your deflegmator, and you can make micro adjustments to it and increase or decrease your proof however you want to. But definitely, I don't even use mine until I get past the fours and heads, unless it's going to be something I'm aging. Now, if it's something I'm going to be aging right about the time when I know that my heads are getting ready to transition into hearts, I'll go ahead and turn that deflegmator on, and I'll compress those lowest heads into my run, right? And then I'm also definitely, compressing the tails, and for the same reason, maintain some of those oils. That way, some of the esters and the oils can combine over time and make some great polyphenols and flavonoids and convert the acids and oils convert and work on each other and making some good flavors, interesting flavors. So it's all, that's some of the fun of it is trying different things. And, like my grappa, I compressed the shit out of the oils to get those oils in there. And, at first it wasn't the greatest, but after time, I aged it. I aged the wine for about a year and a few months, I think, a little over a year. And then distilled it, and then aged the grappa for almost another year. So it's almost 2 years before anybody tried it. And over that period of time, it matured into something really, really good. And had I not compressed those oils, from the tails and my the low heads, I probably wouldn't have pulled that kind of flavor. And I owe everything, all that to that being able to compress with that deflagmator. But it's not for everything. Sometimes you don't want some of those oils. Some of the oils that come off certain things aren't going to be so flavorful, right? So, what's going on, Steve? Thanks, brother. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family, man. Yeah, yeah. See, the output is just like your flake stand. You really don't want to adjust the output at all because it'll all come out as it's being fed in, and you want to feed it in through the bottom. That way it fills up and pulls out the top. And it's the same way with your worm. I don't know why they put valves at the top of the worm, because you just leave it wide open, and you adjust the input. And as you adjust that input, because you can only go out so fast. And so, yeah, the valve on the input on the bottom, and just have cold and hot going into a Y valve, and then the output of that going into the bottom, and just adjust the temperature there. You don't need to adjust the outflow at all, because you can adjust your flow rate with how much is going in. Now, I will say that if you were having trouble combining the two, you could put a valve on the top to make sure that you getting a specific dwell time. And if you were having trouble, adjusting both the hot and the cold, and maintaining a low flow, you might put some resistance on it with a valve at the top. But I would say you should pretty much be able to take care of that with just a warm and cold at the bottom, and adjusting your flow rate and temperature with those. But yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's basically what your deflagmators do. And when you do run a column, you definitely should run a deflagmator, because that's how you adjust um, the column. Because if not, then the only way you would have to adjust, your column would be to adjust the heat on the steel itself, and adjust the vapor velocity coming up out of the steel. So that would be the only way to adjust. Otherwise, would just be adjusting the temperature. You don't want to do that. You want to get to a certain level of output, and then manage your column and your reflux with your deflagmator. Right. Reflux condenser, deflagmator. I've heard people say deflamator, um, but there is a G in that. So I've always pronounced the G. I don't know if it's silent. And maybe there's more than one spelling for it. Yeah, deflag. I've heard a lot of people call it deflamator. Let me spell it without the G and see if it. Yeah, it's got the G. But I've heard a lot of people pronounce it without the G. That's always been something I've curious about. That's why I wanted to search it, because I've heard a lot of people say deflamator, and I've never heard it pronounced deflamator. I've always heard it deflagmator or deflagmator. I just found a good deal on a 4-inch deflamator. But I've got some copper and a couple of 4-inch ferrules, so I'm thinking about making my own. That'd be a good little project to make a video on for the DIY channel. Right. And earlier I was talking about the flake. That's just what your worm is in. So it's called a flake stand. Traditionally, I mean, they may call it something. Is the G silent? I've always called it the phlegmator. I don't know. All right. Now we're gonna have to hear Siri say it. Let's hear it. Let me put my anything down. Let's see. I don't hear nothing. Deflammator. This says deflammator. I've never. Yeah, that's a weird voice. I don't know who the hell made that voice. Yeah, that's weird. That dude, I gotta get different. Maybe we get a female voice or something. That dude sounded weird. Let's see. Oh, a commercial just to get pronounced. Deflegmator is the way they're pronouncing it. So, Deflegmator. That's the way I've heard it. So I guess, yeah, I guess there's different. I guess there's different ways because they definitely. I heard the G in that one, and then that was a woman's voice. So I'm gonna take her word for it. It's a lot better sounding. That first voice, I think it was a male robotic, and that was a strange ass voice. But I'm drinking Bloody Butcher Sour Mash. Uh, but one of them pronounced it with the G, one didn't. So I guess there's more than one way to pronounce it. I've heard people call it deflamators, and I've heard the deflegmators or deflegmators. So I guess it might be potato or whatever. I guess if you're above the Mason Dixon, it might be one way, and south of the Mason Dixon. But I've heard a lot of people pronounce it both ways. Oh heck no, brother. We're all learning here and sharing information, and I learned a little bit tonight about rhubarb, and I'm definitely gonna have to try to get some of his wine. But yeah, we're all here to learn, brother. The day you quit learning is the day you die, unless you just do a lot of talking and no listening. That's the Yeah, Anthony. Sure. So basically, a thumper is called a doubler, and technically, it's not a doubler. But what happens in the thumper is the same thing that happens in your steel, except its heat source isn't coming from the bottom. The heat source is coming from the steam vapors that enter the thumper. So as you're, let's say you're making a run, and you're on a steel that produces, let's just say, um, let's throw this little keg up here. So you're running this little keg steel, and you don't have your deflator or the deflegmator on, and so you're running about 130 proof, right? And we talked earlier about how, in the older days, they didn't really start with a high gravity, so a lot of times you had to run it twice to get your proof up to a suitable proof to drink, because the first time it'd come off at about 70 proof or 80, and you'd get quite a bit more product at that, but it just didn't have a lot of proof. So they'd take that 70 or 80, and then they would rerun it, and bump up the proof to where you could get a good 100 proof for 30 to put in a barrel and age or do whatever, but you could get a higher concentration of alcohol. So when they were doing that, they got tired of having to run it twice. So one day somebody got brilliant and thought, well, I wonder what would happen if we just put us a little thumper or a little, basically a second pot in between the steel and the condenser. And and maybe those vapors go in and they start building up inside there, and it gets redistilled the second time inside there, just from the heat of the steam and the vapors coming into it. So what would happen is uh, the steam would come out of the pot. Let me take that off there now. The steam would come out. Oops, let me take that off there now. So the steam would come out of the pot, and instead of going into the condenser, it'd go into a second pot. Now, later, I'll tell you what they started doing later, but first they just started running this thumper, and it got its name from the noise it would make as the steam would heat it up and feed. It would feed into the pot, and once you got liquid above, your line going in goes almost to the bottom, right? It's about an inch off the bottom, and that way, as the vapors build up and condense inside there, you start puddling up and getting the liquid level covers the input. So it bubbles inside there, and the pressure going into it causes it to kind of bubble, 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 and thug. And it makes noises as it increases pressure inside there. But what happens is, as that liquid builds up, you've got, 70, 80 proof. And then as that steam would come in and reheat it, it would be like the second run. It'd be like running 70, 80 proof and then putting it back into the still and running it again. So you had this 70 or 80 proof getting redistilled with the vapors. So that increased the proof coming out 120. Oh, damn, that's great. That's good enough to put in a barrel. That's great. We're getting 120, 30 proof. We can go straight to a barrel with that. So that was what they did. And a lot of times they would save their tails. And they found that by putting the tails in that thumper, which came later, that you could increase the volume of alcohol and the quality of it and get all the ethanol out of those tails and leave a lot of those tails behind. And so that's what a lot of people did. They'd put the tails in the thumper, and they would run that, and they would get that extra production out of those. And the little bit of tails that would smear over, well, that was okay too, because they was going to age it and put it in barrels, and over time that, along with those low heads combined to the oils and the acids, organic acids and oils combining to make, interesting flavors, and that's what happens over the aging process. It's like wine too. It's the same principle, except it's, the heads, the tails, and everything's in a wine. So you've got all the heads, you've got all the tails in a wine, and they're working, just the same over time to esterify and make interesting flavors. And the same thing happens inside a barrel or inside a jar. If you age in a jar, you're not going to get the smoky flavor from the barrel, but you're still going to get that working. So it's just, and it doesn't double the proofs. Notice that we went from 70, 80 to 120, 130. So it's not, 140, 160. You're not going to get a true doubling out of it, but it did increase the proof, and it therefore it definitely, that's how they came up with thumper. And it wasn't necessarily designed to increase the quality. It was just to increase the proof and make it a lot quicker and easier on the distiller. And it was definitely wasn't all about flavor, because thumpers really don't, unless you start doing like modern day, where we add a lot of flavors in there now to infuse. Now once you start doing that, yes, that thumper can add some good flavors, but thumpers really weren't used originally to infuse with, and they were used to uh, increase the production time, and it really hindered flavor, I would say, a little bit. I would say it's it it yeah, it reduced, so you wouldn't have to run it twice or two, three times. But it was definitely done for a business decision. It wasn't about flavor or anything like that. It was done to decrease the amount of time it took to make the alcohol, so you wouldn't have to run it twice. It decreased the time, decreased the fuel to heat the steel. It's very efficient. And it made liquor cheaper to produce and easier to produce, and you know, not just moonshiners weren't the only people using it. That a lot of people back in the 1800s were using, that type of technology. Now they have, these fractional distillation columns that are far superior, and you won't see a double in a lot of your higher end places. You won't see, thumpers or doublers in those. Most of those are using fractional distillation columns, and they can separate the heads, the hearts, and the tails on one run, and continuously. So they'll feed mash in, continuously, and they'll have this big, huge column. They'll get the heads out of the top, the hearts out of the middle, and the tails out of the bottom, and all those go to a different spot. So it's all fractionally distilled in a big, huge column now. But that didn't. And then you have hybrids that have both pot and fractional distillation columns, and then you've got just straight pot still. So a lot of your and it's all about production, right? So I'm not saying that the columns that do the separating the are better. It's more efficient, kind of like the thumpers made things. So these fractional distillation columns are definitely more efficient, but that doesn't necessarily mean better flavor. So that's why a lot of times, out of some of your craft distillers, you'll get some of your better flavors because they're making things with not so much concern about quantity and more quality. And and there has to be a trade-off, and so you have to be able to make, and it's a business decision. Um, Well, yeah, it does. It will definitely be cleaner, and a lot of people don't realize it, but as your proof goes up a little bit, you can get cleaner and better liquor. Higher proof to a point. Higher proof doesn't mean less flavor. It sometimes means lighter flavor, and sometimes some of those heavy flavors aren't good, but lightening some of those flavors up can be. So, it just depends on what you're distilling and how you're distilling it. So, there's no set way. There's just depends on what your distillery is. Yeah, yeah. And again, depends on the distillate and the production, and the distillate. Some fractional columns aren't going to make a good brandy. That's not what they're designed for. They're not going to be designed for a good flavored brandy or a rum. Um, I use the liquid malt extract, but yeah, I use LME. But yeah, use it sparingly. But yeah. Yes, I have, but don't use a lot of it. It can easily get overwhelming. It's kind of like putting cinnamon in your jar rigs, or your thumper. It's something you definitely want to keep cut back. But yeah, the dry malt extract and the liquid LME and DME, yeah, I've used them. I use the liquid, but you just use them sparingly, and don't depend on that for all your sugars and everything, because it can get overpowering, kind of like chocolate malts, can easily get, the dark malts especially can get overpowering. So can the malt extracts, and they can definitely get way too much easily. With your chocolate malts, probably it probably be, well, I mean, too much is subjective. You may come out and you say this is the best ever. I use mine as a flavoring more as depending on it as a primary thing. So in 3 pounds in a 5 gallon, I probably wouldn't have used that much, but I mean, I'm not going to say it's right or wrong. Tell me how it comes out. But I've always just used mine kind of sparingly as just a flavoring kind of thing, and I really didn't depend on it as much. He's talking about the dry malt extract or liquid malt extract. He's used 3 pounds in 5 gallons. I'm thinking that's going to be way too much. But I mean, it may be also something that you can use to blend uh, into something else. So dried malt extract probably going to be different than my LME. I mostly use the liquid malt extract, and I'm thinking the liquid probably going to be a lot more concentrated than the dried malt. Especially if it's just a ground up malt, then I would say you're going to be fine. Uh, but if it's a chocolate malt or a denatured malt that was like a chocolate malt or something like that, um, I would say that that's going to be a bit much in a 5 gallon. Let's see, 5 gallon, and that'd be 10 pounds of grain minimum, 10 to 12, and 3 be about 20. It won't be too bad. I would say if you could have used a little bit less, it'd be fine. But if that's equivalent to a dried ground malt, then you should be fine. But my LME is pretty concentrated flavor wise, and I measure mine differently. I don't go by the pounds as much as I do the ounce. So it's going to be a little different for you. So I'm not quite sure. You've done 100% LME. Yeah, I'm not used that much. I think mine probably be equivalent to maybe 5%. So I've never used a real high percentage of it. But I do know the darker malts that you definitely want to cut back on them. Definitely don't want to use a lot of them percentage wise. I think 5 or 10% would be a pretty good range to start with, and adjust it to your taste. But I know a lot of people that use like 20 or 30, and it was too much for them. But again, tastes vary, and it's there's no right or wrong really. It's just what you like, and you may like a lot more. Some people hate malt liquors; they hate malted, so they don't. So not everybody's going to view it the same, right? So um, it could be a lot of different ways. That's different, Mark Morgan. We call it that's shadow. Yeah, I've used the LME and done that for a flavoring, but I've not used it for any diastatic or any kind of conversion or anything like that. I've just added it to, corn and wheat usually. But now I just mostly use barley malt or malted barley. What was your gravity? Yeah, for the beers. $1.65. Damn, I would have guessed it'd been higher. I mean, with 5 gallons of water, 9 pounds of sugar alone should have given you that. So I mean, I guess there's not much coming out of the LME though, or the DME. Yeah, it's not. That's why, and cooking malted corn was always a challenge too, because you didn't want to denature it. So it was a really long, slow, drawn out cooking process, and something that you graduated up, right? You started cold and cooked it and increased your temperature slowly, like you do beer. Whereas now, without the malt, it's the reverse process. We heat it as hot as we can get it, at 185, 100, 200, 190 plus, and go backwards, right? So it's things have changed as far as when you talk to beer makers, they don't use corn. They're not used to using corn. So when you add corn to it, it's like, okay, so what point do I add my corn? I'm like, well, you can do it two ways. You can start with your corn at this temperature and gelatinize and then use your amylase and bring it down to where you add your other grains and like, oh wait, what? They're used to step mashing up. So, one way I know a lot of beer makers do is they'll cook their corn. Now I'm not talking about malted corn. They'll cook their corn first and then do their grains in a separate thing and then mix them together once they're done. Yeah, I think it is. I think it's a little bit low. I think 9 pounds of sugar and 5 gallons of liquid. Just another pound of sugar should have got you to 108. That's 2 pounds per gallon. That should be close to 108. But I'm not sure, if adding the DME might have affected that somehow. But yeah, you should have been able to get about a 107.5 or 7 something out of that. But yeah, for me, yeah, malted corn is very difficult. It's a very difficult thing to work with. That's why, the amylase was such a godsend. Um, yeah, liquid amylase is definitely the way to go. Malting the corn was fine, but when you cooked it, you would have to gelatinize that corn at 100 and less than 155 degrees, and it took many, 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 many. Did I mention how many, 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 many hours, and to gelatinize corn. Now everybody thinks that you have to cook corn at 185, 90 to gelatinize it. No, um, you cook it at that temperature if you're in a hurry and you don't want to wait for 10, 12 hours cook time, and you're going to use liquid amylase or powdered amylase or some exogenous enzyme, and you're not relying on any kind of malted grain. But if you have that malted corn, you can't give it over 155 or you denature the alpha inside the corn. So you'd have to cook that at 150 degrees for many, 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 many hours and to gelatinize it. And it just took forever. It does. It takes for a long and more and more and more and more hours. It's just economically not feasible. It takes so much gas to cook it that long or cook it on the stove. It's just more labor intensive. That's why the using the enzymes, exogenous enzymes, have been such a godsend to the distilling industry. It's streamlined the process so much that you don't have to. Now I will say that the slow process, always like winemaking and everything else, generally is better. So that malted corn cooked for 10 hours, 12 hours, and gelatinized forever, it will produce probably some of the best, corn liquor you'd ever drink. But, compare that to what you can do now, steeping it at 185, 95, for 90 minutes and then throwing the enzymes to it and then putting a little cream corn in the thumper and or a jar rig and run that shit out. You'll get as just a good smooth flavor out of it now as, that long drawn out process. But it. Oh yeah, definitely. High temp. Yeah. Yeah, the liquid amylase and the powdered amylase, really, when it first came out, it was a big game changer too, because we didn't have to cook that corn that long and we didn't have to use malted barley anymore. We could use exogenous enzymes, use that powdered, alpha and that powdered glucose and get great conversions, considering and not have those big long wait times and cook times. Oh yeah, that's the secret. Don't tell anybody about that. Yeah, take you some cream corn and puree it up, put it in a blender, and make sure you get all your kernels, because I don't want to see a kernel getting thrown up into these little 3/8 inch bever pipes and causing back pressure and explosion or something like that. So never put anything small like that. Make sure everything that you put into thumpers, especially smaller thumpers that basically, you know, handle puke pit, what do they call them, little puke pot or whatever. Um, but you don't want something like that when you set that gin in there. A lot of times you're setting that like it, for example, you had grapes in there. You set that thing in there without pureeing them, and you could just force a grape into that downcomer coming in on the end pipe, and that puts a lot of pressure on your pot, and that can cause some bad things to happen. That's why some people put a little elbow on their lids that go down into the thumpers. When they make them like that, like your jar rigs or some people thumper. And they actually put them in. Uh, but if you have like a grape or something like that pukes up and gets into your worm or something, it can cause back pressure. But yeah, for a 5 gallon for sugar wash, yeah, you want to add cream corn to your thumper will definitely help. But puree it first, and it'll give you a good corn flavor. But if you can, if your thumper has like an infusion chamber where you can open it up and dump that in after you get through your heads and your four shots and your heads, it's best to add that in so you don't get that smearing. Now, for a 5 gallon run of sugar wash, all you need for a 5 gallon sugar wash is 5 gallons of water, 10 pounds of sugar. You want to throw in some of your oyster shells that I talk about, to help keep the pH buffered. And you can throw in a little citric acid to bring your pH down. But on a wash like that, you're really not going to have to worry so much about pH, being low enough to start with, because it's going to drop pretty quickly anyway. So this is one of the fermentations you really don't have to get that initial pH at 5.3. I would shoot for maybe six, mid sixes, or six be fine. There's not a lot of things that are going in there bacteria wise that are going to, but make sure you boil the water and make sure you get your sugars dissolved well into the water. And then make sure you boil those oyster shells. You can get them at the feed stores. We talk about them, put them in get you a couple handfuls for 5 gallons. One big old handful should be fine. And tie it up in some cheesecloth after you boil it, rinse it and cool it. put it in some cheesecloth and just throw it in there about the same time you do your yeast. And when you're done, you can take it out and rinse it through your cheesecloth bag and just dry it out and reuse it. But if you're going to reuse it, boil it each time because bacteria will build up on them. Not so much with sugar washes, but when you throw them in wine and when you got vegetable matter or fruit matter in there, it's going to want to, get some bacteria on it. So clean them up each time and use them, and you don't have to worry about some off flavors or some unsanitary conditions or other things getting in there. But yeah, 2 pounds of sugar per gallon of water dissolved real well. You could use a little lemon juice in there if you want to instead of citric acid. But throw those crushed oyster shells in there, and that'll keep your pH fine. And then throw your yeast in there. You can throw some you're going to need some nutrients because there's absolutely no nutrients at all in there. So you can boil some yeast if you don't have any other type of nutrient. But I highly recommend just buying a bag of Dyma Fermax or Fermo. A lot of people like the Fermo. It seems to be the most probably sought after these days. Used to be Fermax, a little cheaper, but Fermo, organic, and you don't have to worry about urea if that's a big concern. A lot of people have big concern with urea, but most of your Fermaxes don't have any urea in it. If it does, it's a food grade, and it's not anything that's going to hurt anybody. But throw a little bit of your nutrients in there. It'll be on the package how much you use per gallon, and pitch those in there, and stir it up real well, oxygenate it, and get it oxygenated. And when your temperatures get about to 80 to 85 degrees, you can go ahead and get your yeast starter going on the side with a little sugar, and pitch your yeast, and won't take long. There's a few days, 3 to 5 days. It goes really quick and hard. If it sticks on you in the middle, it's usually because of pH. So if you have those oyster shells, it can help your pH crash. Yeah, 2 pounds per gallon will give you about a 1080, and that'll be fine for a sugar wash. It's going to have a lot of fire to begin with. It's going to be hot. Even if you go at a lower gravity, it's still hot because it's just pure sugar, and it goes so fast, and it's stressful. And yeah, but yeah, I wouldn't exceed the two. Yeah, yeah, 1080 is definitely the max. And with the sugar ferment, it's not as big an issue with the brandy, and fruit. 1070 is probably a pretty good number. For grains, 106070 is a fine number. But for a sugar wash, it's going to have some bite. But yeah, oyster shells, you can get them at the feed stores. It's used in chickens. It's used in farming. They give them to chicken for supplementing the calcium. It's calcium carbonate, basically all it is. You've probably seen the pH buffer, the 5.2 buffer stuff, and this is the same calcium carbonate. It doesn't raise pH instantly like a baking soda, or a sodium bicarbonate or a pickling lime. Um, what it does is it's a buffer. So as things become more acidic, it eats away at this and neutralizes the acid. So it's not something that you just throw in there to raise pH. It's something you really need to start with. And as these organic acids and stuff develop, and they will, especially in a really fast, hard fermentation like a sugar wash or a rum wash of any kind, or even your tequilas, always throw in that bag. It's not as critical in like your grains. Your grains generally 3 to 5 days their work. It's not real fast. It's not hard. There's plenty of nutrients. There's not a lot of stress involved. And there's not a lot of pH crashing as a result of all those. So, but when you use just pure sugar, in your tequila washes, your rum washes, and your sugar washes, a lot of those, you'll notice that you get pH crashes a lot more in those than you would in a typical, grain bill or in a lot of your brandies. So unless of course you're using a lot of sugar with the fruit, like if you're doing like my strawberry, it requires considerably more sugar than most of your other fruits because there's not a lot of sugar in a strawberry. I was really surprised the first time I did it. I was like, wow, I thought there'd be more sugars than this, and there's not. So, but yeah, the oyster shells, they don't shoot pH up. In fact, if you try to add calcium carbonate, pure calcium carbonate to the solution, it just floats on top. And then you try to stir it, and it just sticks to the spoon. It just doesn't really mix with water well. It will over time, but it takes time. So, but throw these shells in there, and the acid works on them. So the acid will dissolve just enough calcium carbonate off those crushed shells to neutralize itself. That's why it's considered a buffer, and it definitely helps prevent crashes. But it's not an instant help like pickling lime would in to raise pH. Yeah, they're all washes. It's all considered washes. But it's the harshness and it's the source of the sugar. Like table sugar is a fructose and a glucose bonded together, so you have a disaccharide, which is a little harder for the yeast to consume than a monosaccharide, which is just a pure glucose, which is probably what you get from your cane juice or from your corn syrups. That's just a glucose, and that's a monosaccharide. Dextrose, that's also a monosaccharide of glucose. Much, much less stress involved in the consumption of those than a sucrose. But yeah, yeah, right. And that's what I did forever and ever and ever, Mark. It's called a thin mash. Exactly what it's called. And sometimes we wouldn't even get corn. We just buy cornmeal, that you can get at the store. You can buy cornmeal and sugar and water and bread yeast and make some decent corn liquor out of it. I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass and say it's as good as a nice heirloom corn or even a good, converted corn. But it was a good, easy way to make corn liquor, and it was a lot better than just a sugar shine. So basically, it was a corn flavored sugar wash. You'd get some conversion going on there, not very much at all, but it made a flavored wash is basically what a thin mash is. I made that for decades. That's what most moonshine was back in the day. It was cornmeal or cracked corn ground on up and added with sugar and water, cooked and cooled, and you would get some conversion, but not a lot. Natural conversion, but not a lot. And yeah, and it thin mash shine. I'd say that for many, many years from the 40s to the 80s, I'd say probably 80% of all the moonshine was pretty much a thin mash shine. There wasn't a lot of moonshiners that did, grain conversions and did all this type stuff. That's what distillers did. That's something that came with a more uh, schooled um, shiner. But most shiners just use sugar. When sugar became less expensive, it was a lot easier. Just add that with your cornmeal, throw in some sugar. It would turn out a decent enough shine. Everybody still bought it. It's not as good as a converted grain, but you know, clients bought it. You can make twice as much, a lot easier, less expensive, and it was a business decision, and it was what really put food on the table, and it helped put an extra $100 in your pocket a month. um I think rum yeast have some natural enzymes in there specifically for your rum that wouldn't probably be utilized in just a sugar wash, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. I mean, it's good. It's good, but it would it's a little bit more expensive because it does have some of these uh, enzymes in it that help break down this. I think Clint was talking earlier about how the rum, finished out at 1.1, 1.2, and that's because you have unfermentable sugars in that molasses or sorghum or blackstrap, whatever you're using. And so there's unfermentable sugars in there. If you use a rum yeast, it will convert those unconvertible, those ones that just yeast can't break down. It converts them so yeast can. So yeah, it has some special enzymes in there for that. What's going on, Jason? Good to see you, brother. Uh-oh, we got a shadow. Mark, you're not the only shadow. Yeah, I mean it made a good thin mash. It's called thin mash shine, and I would say that a, a lot of moonshine was made that way. Most of the shine that I got, if I didn't make it, that's the way they were doing it too back in the day. And a lot of times they'd throw they in your quart jar, they'd cut a peach in half and put both halves in there, or throw in a handful of grapes to help, kind of soften things up a bit and add a little flavor. But yeah, that's how most of it was made for a long period of time. They didn't do a lot of, it wasn't a craft as much as it is these days with the conversion and the amylase and using malted grains and all that. That's what that they did mostly on the commercial end. But most of your shiners back in the old days, it was mostly thin mash. Now there was a point in time, like I was talking about earlier, that sugar was expensive. And in those days, you had to use malt, and you came in with low gravity, and you'd malt your own corn. You come in at low gravity, and you'd have to run it 2 or 3 times. And that's where the doubler came in. And this is all just the progression. And now, today we've got these exogenous enzymes. We're spoiled, man. We can cook that corn and convert it and make some of the best moonshine ever. And anybody that says the old moonshine is better than it was today, no, it is not. It's much better today than it was back in the day. I can assure you that. Because we are all learning, and it's evolved. It's gotten better. And not just through the techniques, but the equipment. If you'd seen some of the shit they used back in the day, it wasn't pretty. Car radiators for condensers and oil drums for boilers and galvanized pipe for in between. Yeah, it's much better today. Trust me, much safer too. Yep. What's going on, Roy? Good to see you, brother. Yeah, it is tongue wet and time running. My face, my nose ain't red enough yet. Is trying to read through this here. Getting a little bit 10:30. I'm doing pretty good now. If I'm making corn and sugar mash, do I add a pound of corn to 1 gallon of water and 2 pounds of sugar to water? Now, if you're doing just corn and yeah, you can add just cornmeal if you want to flavor it up. You can add cracked corn, whatever. It's not something that you're converting if you're just doing, a flavored wash. So that I would go with maybe 1.5 pounds of sugar because there is some, and it depends on the corn. If it's a starchy corn, then there's not going to be a lot of sugars in there. If it's a sweet corn, you're going to get some natural sugars out of that. And I would probably recommend that if you were just going to, do some corn, if you can get it cheaply enough. If not, then yeah, just cook your corn up and and you know, gelatinize it if you want to gelatinize the corn, and you don't have to convert it. Just gel it up and then add some, you know, water and sugar to it, and of course it's going to be pretty thick, you know, but it's best just go ahead and get the amylase, you know, and do it right, Jason. To be honest with you, if you want to do a sugar wash, do a sugar wash, and you can add some, you know, cornmeal to that for flavoring. Uh, but if you're going to get to a lot of you know, a lot of corn, it's best to it's similar. But yeah, you can use some cornmeal and sugar. You know, use about a pound and a half, 3/4 of sugar, and mix in some, you know, maybe half a pound. You don't want to get it real thick to where it's thick, you know, thickening up on you so much, because it's not something that you're going to gelatinize and convert and all that. So really, you know, just just add them together, and you don't even have to cook it really. You're just using that cornmeal as a flavoring, basically. I just use the hydrometer. You know, if you're dealing with pure sugars like that, nothing that gets converted or anything like that, that no starch, then yeah, just use your hydrometer to determine how much, and just build a recipe. Because that's, you know, your cane juice, you know, it's going to be different, like your based on its maturity. You know, I know a lot of times they get like juvenile, it's unfinished cane and kind of a little on the green side, and they sulfur it, and so make sure you get unsulfured and all that. But yeah, just pure cane juice, I'd say it's going to vary a bit, so I would just use my hydrometer on everything. You know, I just yeah, well, it's not like it used to be, man. You made it, man. Well, I was wondering about you. Yeah, it is getting going up. I've got well, I run a 15 keg and a 18 and a half bever, but I've got a couple of 80s that I used to run stainless, but I do it for hobby now. Yeah, I do a little bit more sugar. I go about a pound and a half to up the gravity some and get some production. I found that um, with just a pound of sugar and a gallon of water and a pound of corn, unless it's a sweet corn, you're only going to get a 1040, 1045 out of it. And it's just, and then you're definitely going to have to do, you know, use the thumper, cook it twice. But about a pound and a half is what I would recommend, because it's mostly just the corn's just the flavor. You will get a little bit of a touch of natural conversion, but it's not going to be enough to mount to anything. Yeah, I definitely I would do. I agree, John, for the simplicity of it, and stick around. Let me scroll up, Anthony. Stick around, because I'm gonna give you a method to do corn, and if you follow these instructions to the T, you'll, you know, unless you're doing a sugar wash just to clean your steel out, a new steel, which is perfectly fine, and if that's the case, a pound and a half to a gallon. Don't even waste a lot of sugar, because it's something you're going to throw away. But if you're looking for the most basic recipe, I can make it simple enough to convert these sugars for you to make it worth your while. And it's something that you'll be glad that you did, because you'll end up with a much better drink than what a thin mash or a sugar wash is going to give you. So stick with us. We're going to go through that real quick here in just a minute. I'm telling you, man, most of my brandies, become brandies because they didn't make good wines. Because I've found over the years that I've ruined a lot of really good wines by distilling it and coming up with a brandy that really I couldn't tell you what fruit it was made with. I could tell you there's some flavors in there, but I couldn't say, well, that's definitely made with blackberries or this fruit or that fruit. That's why I say if you can make a brandy and you can taste it and say, oh, that's made with blackberry, then you've done pretty damn good. That's all I can say. But yeah, I've ruined a lot of good wine by distilling it, and that's a lot of times now, like I was talking about earlier, it'll sit in a jar or a bottle for 4 years, and once it becomes not so good of a wine anymore, that's when it gets. I bought a column. It's on the way. It's a big 4-inch, 4 bubble plate column. Can't wait to run it, but I'm going to neutralize a lot of my mistakes and a lot of old wine. I Yeah, I figure a gallon of sugar, a pound of sugar in a gallon of water, I get about a 1040. And if I double that, I close to a 1080 generally. I guess it varies. But yeah, yeah, me too, man. That's people say, well, what kind of wine you gonna make next? I'm like, whatever the grocery stores put on sale or whatever I can source for free. So, it might be blackberry season or blueberry season or apple season. It's going to have to be some sort of season where I can get them from free from somebody or get it cheap at the store because fruit's expensive, man. Yeah, if you can use your oats and get you some cracked corn and those bran flakes, they work well. They make a good nutrient too. So you can crush those bran flakes up and use them in a sugar wash or anything like that, and it'll help feed your yeast. But yeah, bran flakes make a good nutrient for sure. But I always go back to, we did the cost analysis and everybody's come up with so many different products that are great nutrients. And it's like even tomato paste, and it was just not that great of a nutrient. And and it, and I've broken it all down and it costs more per yan fan to buy anything else other than the Fermax, Fermo, or Fermade. Can't recommend it enough. Buy a bag, use that and forget about boiling expensive yeast because you talk about yeast and even the cheapest of bread yeast is a lot more expensive than buying this Fermo or Fermate or Fermax because you get a bag. I mean, you're using half a teaspoon, per gallon, teaspoon, depending on what you got. It's really very minimal, and you can step feed. That's what they recommend these days. Now, this is something newer for me, and in winemaking and now in brandy making is step feed those nutrients. Used to in the past, I would just throw them all in there at once and zoom through everything, and that increase the speed that everything's done, right? So um, I found now that it's best just to slowly add a little bit over time and add a little bit more, and it helps to do it that way. That way you don't get a real vigorous ferment all at once. You do want it to be slower when you do the fruits, or especially wines. Awesome. That's the score for sure. I ain't too proud of dumpster dive. In fact, if I could find a place, a fruit stand that I knew was putting some fairly decent fruit out, I'd I'd just take my garbage bag. He said, "Here, fill this up before you fill it in your dumpster. Give me a call when it's filled. When it's filled up, I'll come bring you another one." Yeah, yeah. Just And as far as ratios go, it's all just taste. You know, it all just breaks down to taste. I will say the more oats you add, the more gummy it gets. But we're going to go over here in a minute a real quick and easy way to do it. You got a tea wine going. You got a little kombucha, huh? No problem, Anthony. We're getting ready to get started. Okay, so first we're going to source. We've already talked about stills. Corn. I recommend highly getting whole kernel corn if you have something that you can grind it with. If not, you can get the cracked corn, but it does have a little bit of cob in it, and a lot of times you'll get a little bit of other matter in there, maybe a few little bugs. But those not the worst thing in the world. It gets distilled and it's boiling alcohol, so it gets sterilized most everything. So um, a few weevils ain't gonna kill you. But getting the whole kernel corn, it stays fresher over a longer period of time. So you're not as in a big a hurry to use it as when you get cracked corn, it oxidizes and ages pretty quickly. So anyway, what we're going to have to get first of all, you're going to have a hydrometer. And this is a triple scale hydrometer. Let's see if I don't know if I have a pick. Anyway, triple scale hydrometer. And you're going to use this hydrometer to measure the amount of sugars. I'm seeing if I got a picture of one. Measure the amount of sugars that are in your conversion, so you can see if you got a pretty decent conversion or not. I don't have a picture. And yeah, the beverage grinder. And in fact, I got my grinder a couple of years ago on a Black Friday deal, and it was regularly like a $260 some grinder. I got for like $170. So it was a good deal. And man, once you use those, you'll never want to go back to a food processor or blender again. I used to use food processors and blenders until Max went crazy about me running up her good KitchenAid, appliances and all this shit. So I used to go to the Goodwill store and just buy blenders, and old food processors, because that corn and that hard red winter wheat will do a number on those blades. But anyway, so you've got your cracked corn or ground up corn. You can crack it a little finer if it's too coarse or you see a lot of whole kernels in there. But the Producer Pride Tractor Supply seems to be a pretty decent cracked corn. And during deer season, like right now, you'll go through a little bit more. People are getting corn and whole kernel and cracked, and they're putting it out for the deer. So um, you go through quite a bit. Happy Thanksgiving, brother. So or you can use a coffee grinder, whatever. So anyway, you get your corn ground up. Now you're going to use 2 pounds starting out. Now you're going to use 2 pounds, maybe 2 1/4 of pounds of sugar per gallon of water. So a 25-pound or a 50-pound bag of corn, which is essentially how they come, will do 20 gallons of water. But if you want to cut that in half, you do half the bag in 10 gallons, right? So you have 2.5 pounds per gallon. And that I wouldn't exceed that starting out. But you're also going to need to buy what's called high temp amylase. And that can liquid high temp amylase. And it comes in a bag. You keep it stored in the refrigerator. And when you buy that, also buy some liquid glucoamylase. And you'll keep that in the refrigerator right beside it. Put it in a big old gallon Ziploc baggie so it doesn't stink up your fridge, because it does have a bit of an odor to it. My fiance can attest to that. So you want to, use that, and on the label it'll tell you how much to use per gallon and what temperature. Generally, your high temp amylase will go in at 185 degrees. Now, first thing you have to do is you have to gelatinize your corn. So you're going to take the corn and you're going to get right, for doing 25 gallons, we're doing 2.5 pounds per gallon. Let's just base it at that. It's a lot easier for the math. You can go a little lighter or add a little bit more water if you want to thin it out. It gets a little bit unmanageable for you. It's not going to be the end of the world if you use another gallon or so of water or two, right? Let's not add 5 more gallons, but so you're going to cook your corn or steep your corn. Now, for those that are familiar with cooking it, it's fine to cook it, but there's nothing that will ruin a batch any quicker than scorching corn, because once you scorch that corn, it's hard to clean off the pot and it's very easy to do. And if you're not familiar with cooking outside, it's the last thing a beginner should do. So I highly recommend. Um, yeah, yeah, spit does have amylase in it. Actually, there's some tribes in Africa that will have women spitting in some grains, and they use all the women combined spitting in it, the amylase in their spit to help ferment this beer, I guess, that they make. I don't think they distill it, so it's making a beer. But yeah, you get some high temp amylase and liquid glucoamylase, and the same place that you buy one will have the other. So you can get both of those. You can get them off Hillbilly. North Georgia, I think, has them, and Amazon. I don't want to get into the list. I always recommend Philbilly because he's the sponsor of the show. Um, so if I start mentioning a lot of other people, then people, well, I sell it too. I'll carry that. You didn't mention me, so I don't want to leave anybody out. So I just don't, try not to mention anybody like that. I do feel because he's the sponsor of the show. He runs militia, and he helps provide this platform for us to be on. So I definitely appreciate that. But yeah, Amazon has North Georgia's, and or you can just get it from the origin. Just order it out of Danville from Firm Solutions, and that's where a lot of it's made. Or I guess Clint was talking about there's some other major producers all out from I guess Asia and other places that produce it too. Um, yeah, the triple scale hydrometer is used it measures the viscosity of your mash. So it will tell you how much sugars. It doesn't tell you whether they're fermentable or not, but it will tell you. And let me pull up a picture. I was going to, but let me go ahead and pull up a picture. I'm going to run a little bit over 11, but alrighty. Let me add that to. Alrighty. All right, here is a picture of a triple scale hydrometer. Now, they may vary a little bit, but most of them look like this. They're going to have color charts here. You see the red at the top, and that's right at that greenish yellow to red. That's 1.000. That's basically what water will read, a pure water. Now, as you add sugar to water, it's naturally going to float higher, right? As you increase the density, you float higher in it, just like, you know, laying in the Great Salt Lake. You're going to float higher in that salt water than you would in fresh water. So, because of the extra density that the salt and the salinity adds to the water, so does sugar. It adds salinity. It becomes a syrup so thick that this thing won't even read it. But if you look at the scale, you'll see at the top at 10, and then it goes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 to 1.1. Now that's the scale. Now you'll see in the from the bottom of the blue to where it gets red, that's 70, 80, and 90. You really don't want to get out of that range. You definitely don't want to get out of that range. Once you get into the red, it's going to be very, very hot, and it's not going to be a good drink at all. You might be able to triple run it and then add some proofing down and add some flavors and make it a little bit more palatable, but it's just not going to be good, and it's going to stress your yeast, and you probably won't be able to finish it, because your ABV is going to exceed that of what your yeast can tolerate. So you don't want to get too far ahead or too far. But it would take quite a bit. Anyway, so anywhere from 105, 060, anywhere you can get close to the blue line, green line mix there at the bottom, that's a pretty good range. If you get a 107, 080, not the end of the world. That's about 10%. But you get to 12, and it's going to be considerably hotter. That's 1.1, I think, is pretty close to 12, 13. Yeah, about 12. So you definitely don't want to exceed that. But anyway, this will tell you how much sugars that are present in your mash. And it's called a triple scale. And it's called a triple scale because it reads gravity, it reads ABV, estimated ABV based on that gravity, and also gives you a Brix reading. So that's why they call it the triple scale. You can measure 3 different things. So that is a triple scale. So when you see it, sometimes they're colored differently, but most of them are colored like that. And when you do measure that, there's a conversion chart. That's to be measured at room temperature, which is 60 to 70. I think these are calibrated at 60 Fahrenheit. So when you do it, yeah, buy 2, because you're always going to break one. So go ahead and buy 2 at a time, and you won't break that one. If you have one, you'll break it in a heartbeat. Hydrometer. Interesting. But it basically is going to tell you what your gravity is. So it's very essential. So anyway, back to the corn. You're going to have 25 pounds of corn, 10 gallons of water. So you're going to get 10 gallons of water boiling hard. Okay. So hopefully, if you've got a cooler that'll hold 10 gallons or more than 10 gallons, that would be optimal, because what we want to hold this cooking corn, we're going to steep instead of cooking it and scorching it, which you will do on your first 3 or 4 times, unless you're an experienced chef or cook. You'll never stir it enough, and and you'll always end up scorching it. So best method is to have a cooler, and durable cooler, and yeah, I buy 2 that way. I've got I just bought 3 not too long ago. I keep several of them, and the same with the proofing hydrometers. I keep several of those because they break very, very easily. You can look at them and they break. And yeah, that's right. That's a fact. I didn't have them either, and for what they cost, I mean, I just bought 3 for like $4 each. Buying 3 of them. I mean, yeah, if we could have had those and didn't have to just guesswork with taste. But I do tell people, when you get it, do taste it, because you can see and kind of develop a feel for it. But in doing so, I've noticed that no matter how long I've done this, I still couldn't tell you how much gravity it was by tasting how sweet it is. I mean, to me, sweet, and it just, I don't know, doesn't get no sweeter, but it's sweet, and sweeter. I couldn't tell you the difference between 107.0 and 90 just by taste. But you drop that hydrometer in there, you can. Um, I see. So if you've got a cooler, what you're going to do is you're going to pour just about 3 gallons of that boiling water into the cooler. Then you're going to start slowly adding the crushed corn, right? The cornmeal, the cracked corn. You're going to start slowly adding that, all the while stirring. And it's best to get you a mud mixer on a drill, or a paint mixer on a drill, and use that to help stir. Paddle if you want to, if you got good arms and stamina. But you're gonna be stirring for a long time. So you want to slowly add that corn to that boiling water. When it gets so thick where you can't stir it anymore, add a little bit more of that 10 gallons of water, a couple of gallons more, and then add more corn. And then you'll have 25 pounds set to the side. And when you get to the end of the 25 pounds of corn, you need to at least have one, you know, gallon or a gallon and a half of water still sitting on that thing boiling, right? And start your clock. So you got all the corn in that boiling, you know, and you've stirred it up good. You don't have to continue stirring it now because we're not cooking, we're steeping. You let that corn sit. You put a thermometer in there. And as it cools off, as it gets below 185, then you add some more boiling water and stir it in. And then you'll wait and you'll let it sit. And you're going to let it sit for 90 minutes minimum, up to 2 hours. So you keep adding a little bit of hot water each time to keep that temperature up. And if you see why we want to use a cooler, because it will hold those temperatures a lot better than just a open pot, right? Or just a regular barrel or plastic barrel or something like that, which is fine to use as well. But if you can insulate it, wrap it with blankets, anyway, foam in, you can get, I've done the foam inside a 55 with a 40 sitting in it and foamed it up, and that works well. But if you got a cooler, that's going to be the best way to do it if you got a big ass cooler, and that's just the best way. Um, I don't know if organic really helps a lot by the time you get to the end of the distillation process. I think a lot of that organic uniqueness is lost in the process, whereas eating it directly, eating the corn organic versus not, is definitely going to be just like wine and brandy. As it gets distilled, you're definitely going to like an organic fruit or organic made wine or organic made corn that you just eat raw, after it's been cooked versus distilled. I think it loses a lot, but it makes some people feel better knowing that it came from that. And people that are sensitive to certain chemicals, it may be good for them, better. So you've got this corn steeping. Now you've gotten most all your water, and it's steeped for 90 minutes. And you'll notice that it's gotten gelatinized. You'll notice the change in it, how it's gone from just a mush to kind of a gel. And if you've had corn pudding, you know what I'm talking about. So it gels up. Once it gels up like that, you know that you've extracted the starch out of that. You've extracted the starch out of the corn. All right. So you've gone through all your water, and you've got all 10 gallons of water and 25 pounds of corn, and it's steeped for 90 minutes to 120 minutes, and it's gelatinized. Now you take your high temp amylase and you add it, sprinkle it all over, or pour it all over. It's not going to be a whole lot. It'll tell you on the label how much to use, teaspoon, tablespoon. You'll go over it. Then you're going to go back to using your mud mixer, paint mixer, whatever, and you're going to start blending that gelled corn in. And as you do it, you're going to immediately notice it start to thin up on you. It's going to thin up, and it's going to be like, wow, this is becoming more liquefied. And that's called hydrolyzing the corn. You've extracted the starch, and now you're using the enzymes to hydrolyze it. It means it's liquefaction. So it's liquefying the mash, right? So you'll keep stirring that in and stirring it in and get it all mixed in there. Then you're just going to let it sit. Now, if you want to take it out of the cooler at this point in time, it'd be a good idea, because at this point, you want it to cool off, because it takes a long time to cool to the 155 degrees. Or if you're going to use any adjunct grains or malts or anything like that, cooling it down to 155 is when you're going to add your malted barley. If you want to add those, you don't have to. This is the beginning, beginner's thing. You don't have to you don't even have to have malted barley, because we're using enzymes. You can use just regular barley, unless just malted barley has a different flavor. So most people prefer the malt barley over regular barley, but that's just a taste thing that you'll learn later. But as it cools, you'll get to 140 degrees. Now, 140 degrees is where some glucoamylase will require you to add it, and some on down to 100. So you again need to refer to your label and see what temperature you're going to add this liquid glucoamylase to this corn. At this point, you can leave the top of the cooler open, because you're definitely wanting to cool it off quicker to get it to 140, right? And once you get to 140, you can add this liquid glucoamylase to it, stir it in real good again, stir, and we're just going to let it sit. And once it gets to 90 degrees or so, we're going to take it out of the cooler. And unless you want to ferment it in the cooler, you can ferment it in that cooler, and that'll be fine, especially if it's getting a little cooler at nights. That'll help retain some of the warmth it gets during the day. So nothing wrong with that. Just make sure you got plenty of space for that cap to rise up. If not, you can just dump all that into a barrel. It's going to do the same just fine. And you put your little towel over top of the barrel or a lid. Don't seal it because it'll build up a lot of pressure. But once you get it to the yeast pitching temps, you can check your pH. Now, if you want to be technical, that boiling water that you started with, you can add some lemon juice to that or some citric acid and get that to 5.3. And so you can get you some paper. I don't recommend using the pens. A lot of people use the pens. They're expensive. You got to calibrate them all the time. I used to use them. I went through many of them. Little $9 yellow pens. They last you about 6 months, a year, and then it's garbage next. And it just gets to be a pain in the ass. And so I got having to clean them and calibrate them all the time, use the calibrating solutions and making sure you got all that, and using distilled water. And if you like science and you got time and you want to get into it, you can do that. I just ended up getting pH paper. It's an Amazon. Hydrion is the maker name, and it's used for kombucha. Kombuscha. I think that's the way you spell it. That's fermented tea, and they deal with the same pHs that we do in fermentation. It's just fermented tea versus fermented grains or whatever we ferment. So it deals with 0 to 7. So it doesn't go over 7. Anything 7 or above is going to give you that color, and it's a lot easier to read because of its smaller scale. But get that paper, and they say use a inch test piece. I use a half inch because it's 180 inches, so you get 180 readings, and you get the same reading out of a half-inch piece as you do an inch. So I just cut off half inch, use tweezers, stick it down in there, and swish it around and pull it out, and instantly match it up, and you can get your pH. And that's, if you want to pH your water going into the boiling point, that's the perfect time to do it. It will help in your conversion, starting out with the 5.3 pH. If you forgot to, not the end of the world. You can add the citric acid or lemon juice after everything's done and lower your pH. But if you can remember to do that to your water before you boil it, it will help. If you do got a pH meter, perfect. Then that'll work just fine. What's going on, Mash Brothers? I almost missed a comment, bro. Good to see you. Some people, I'd be careful with the aquarium heaters. I've seen some nightmares where people had some heirloom corn and went to a lot of time and trouble, and then dropped that sucker in there, man, that got into the grain, and sometimes the grain will move around on you, and next thing you know, man, they burnt their damn grain and they scorched corn inside their mash, that heirloom and everything in there. I've got, and I brought this down here because I had work on it. These little these little bad boys right here inside in the basement. I can put it right next to 3 big barrels, right in the middle of the barrels, and turn that bad boy on, and I can ferment hundreds of gallons or several 5 gallons, whatever size you got, with just that sitting right in the middle of it. And just turn your barrel once or twice a day, and let that heat, works just fine. And I've never had any issue at all. Easy to regulate. If it gets too warm, you just turn the thermostat down and take the temperature. It really works well. And I'm not, and it's probably, I don't know, probably not as efficient. I'm heating the whole room instead of just that, but that's not so bad either, But so anyway, we've added the liquid at 140, the liquid glucose. So now we're just going to let it naturally cool. And once it gets down to, 195, 90 degrees, you can start thinking about it's time to add some yeast. Then you're going to decide what kind of yeast you're going to use. I always recommend doing a starter. So this is just corn. So this isn't, using any kind of adjunct grains or anything like that, because if you did, you can add those at 155, but then you're going to have to hold those temperatures, right, until the beta glucanase and the alpha amylase in those, if that's what you're going to do. Now, that's a much different process than what we're talking about now. This is a steep process with exogenous enzymes, and that is the best way for beginners, period, hands down. Once we get into that and used to doing it that way, then we can start using the endogenous enzymes that are in some of our malted grains, and depending less on the high temp and the glucose, and depending more on the natural enzymes, endogenous, meaning its origin is within the grain itself, and we can use malted grains to get use those for the conversion. But even when I do that nowadays, I'm still going to throw in some of that powder that I've got that I have to use, and maybe even a little squirt or two of that high temp, just to make sure everything gets converted properly. And it's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to impact your flavor unless you just use way too much. But so yeah. Cheesecloth works great. I don't know about pantyhose. I don't know. I think Clint using his old lady's pantyhose. I don't know. I'm wondering if he uses the foot part or the part in the middle. uh, but yeah, cheesecloth works fine. If you use a sock, I'd use a cotton sock. I don't know about hose and polyester and all these other, you know, resins, plastics and stuff. I don't know. I'm funny about that. But anything like that works as long as it's porous and allows the liquid to flow in and out. But yeah, a white sock, a cotton sock, or something. I don't know. I'm kind of funny about polyesters and rayons and all that in my mash. I worry about them. Panties, yeah. Use some panties. You can get them on eBay, right? From them pretty girls. Yeah, terrible. I should be saying these things. God forgive me. But anyway, so where were we? You got me torn up now. Uh, oh yeah. So with your grains, it's not as critical. The oyster shells, I've never really fooled with them for my grain mashes. All my grain mashes work off in about a week or less. So I've never had any pH crashes, with my grain mashes. Now, when it gets a little cooler and you're looking at extended, mashing periods, there might be a slight risk in it, but really it's not that big. Making a starter yeast basically is taking the yeast that you're going to add to it. So if it adds, if it's a tablespoon per every 5 gallons, or whatever your yeast calls for, you're just going to get a big quart jar. You're going to fill it with water that's about 85 degrees, 90, and then you're going to add about a quarter cup or third cup of sugar. Third cup's fine. And then you're going to add your yeast on top of that. And then you're going to put the jar in, and you're going to shake the shit out of it, really super oxygenate it and dissolve that sugar up in it, get all that broken up. Then take the lid off. Do not leave that lid on, and set it in a pot. Set it in a stock pot that can handle it if it overflows, which it very well often does. And just let it sit for about 20, 30 minutes, and you'll see, if it overflows, it's not the end of the world. We're just going to pour that into the mash, and we're going to rinse the pot out and let a little bit of water there. It's fine. Just it won't hurt anything. But that just makes sure that your yeast is viable and it gets it started. Some yeasts require that, not all do, but it will help you determine how viable the yeast is, and and you can adjust the usage based on that. So I would say that would be a good idea for sure, John. Absolutely. So that's basically how you do a starter, and just set it in a pot because it'll foam up on you. And as you do that, it's going to cool. Your mash is going to cool, and then by the half hour, when that yeast is started and hydrated and ready to go, you should be at about 85, 90 degrees. You don't want to be over 90, because that's too warm for your yeast. It's going to cool off. uh, Different yeast, different temperatures, like we were talking earlier. Your Kveki yeast like a little bit warmer. Your tequila yeast like a little bit warmer. Um, Wine yeast a little cooler. Bread yeast a little warmer. Deity yeast a little warmer. So deity yeast and your Kveki and a lot of your tequila yeast and all that, mid 80s is fine. 80 to 85 is perfectly fine in range. Love it. Bread yeast the same. But as if you're using wine yeast, you might want to drop that down into the mid 70s or lower, right? So, like EC 1118 is a champagne yeast, it likes it around 72, 68, 72. So a lot of your wine yeast and that type yeast are going to like it a little bit cooler than your bread yeast, your deity yeast, your Kveki yeast, your tequila yeast, which actually, bread yeast prefer it a little bit warmer in the mid 80s. So um, just whichever works best with you. Um, yeah, 71B. Okay. Yeah, Lalvin. Yep, that's a good yeast, and that's a wine yeast. And the 74 is good too, and for like meads. I think you were talking about meads, that 71 or 74. Yeah, I think that 74 is probably renowned for being one of the best for your meads. D47. Yep, 71B or D47. That's what I meant. 47, not 74. You're right. Yep. D47 is great for meads. I've got some just for that specific purpose, and it works well. And it likes cooler temperatures. All your wine yeast and your champagne yeast, the EC 1118, you'll hear a lot of people talking about the Lalvin. That's a champagne yeast, and it likes it 68, 72 in that range. It's slower. When you ferment at those lower temperatures, it is going to be a slower, more prolonged ferment, which is exactly what you want with a wine. Now, with a beer or a grain, it's not that critical. So, it's especially if you're going to be distilling it for liquor. So, faster, warmer isn't going to hurt things, but it is yeast specific temperature wise. So you want to adjust your temperature for that. So we've pitched our yeast, and we're pretty much it's that damn simple. It can be harder. There's other things that you can do. You can, you know, throw in some tomato paste if you're worried about nutrients being slightly deficient or something like that. But you're not going to get yan and fan, but you will make your yeast happier with the biotins and the calcium and some other things that are in there. But with your grain yeast, you generally don't need any nutrients. With an all corn, it wouldn't hurt to put a tad in there. So if you wanted to throw in some bran flakes, like he was talking about earlier, that would be an awesome, perfect thing to throw in on all corn. Is the couple of crushed up, the very bottom thin crushed up part of your bran flakes. Hell yeah, that's perfect. Or if you have a little bit of malted grains and you want to throw them in at 135, 40, you can throw them in there and not really worry about them for conversion, but just use that for a little food. That'd be fine too. If you've got some yeast, that'd be fine. If you got a little bit if you got DAP, which you should have, just a pinch, maybe a fraction of what it would normally call for would be okay. Because technically corn does have yan and fan, not quite enough to really do it super efficiently, but most people don't add nutrients to the corn, because it's a grain. It does have nutrients. It does have nearly enough, probably 85, 90 and change percentage wise of the nutrients that it needs. So it's really, really a small fraction, and most people don't stew over that. But I just want to put it out there, just as a matter of fact, that if you wanted to throw a tad in, it wouldn't hurt. And that those bran flakes, throwing those in would add some flavor, add some nutrients. The oats, throwing in a handful or two of oats at 135 to 40 range. When it's cooling off, just stirring those in. When you stir in that liquid glucose at 140, throw in those bran flakes, throw in that oats at that same temperature, give her hell, stir them in good. And as it cools, those will extract all the flavor, and you'll get probably some additional sugars out of those. So it certainly doesn't hurt. But what happens is the when you're hydrolyzing, when you've gelatinized and you hydrolyzed that, you've basically taken the complex starches, which are these right here. And these are the complex starches. Now you can forget the one to the left, the glycogen. That's animal starch. That's what we deal with in our bodies. But the amylose and amylopectin is the starch I was talking about earlier that's in all the grains. Now, it'll look different when you gelatinize corn versus gelatinizing your more heavy gluten-based wheats or rye or oats and barleys, because they look a little different than a gelatinized corn. Unless it's like a white corn, then it'll look a little similar, but it's a different goo. But this is basically this is what the starch is. This is the complex starch that it begins with. So as you add the high temp alpha amylase, it'll go in and it's an endo enzyme. So it'll start at the very middle of this amylopectin chain here, and it'll start debranching those off that amylopectin. So it starts breaking these branches off. And the 1,6, 1,4 that you're used to seeing, and tells you how many molecules in that it does debranches. So different amylase, different enzymes will go 1,6, 1,4, and that's telling you how many molecules in that it goes. So your alpha is really going to break these up. And that's why it thins things out real quickly, is because this heavy, thick starch is being thinned out. And that alpha will break these up from the inside out. Now, it still will leave long chains. It's called an oligosaccharide, and it'll be anywhere from 3 to 13, strands long, and your yeast can't eat that. So, if you're just using alpha, I mean, sometimes it'll be like that blind squirrel flying in the nut. It will sometimes debranch just a couple, off some of these branches, but it's not going to be enough to be like considered a conversion, right? So you need the secondary enzyme, which is going to be your beta glucanase if you go the endogenous enzymes, which is coming from the grain, or since you're using the liquid glucose, that's called an exogenous enzyme, because its origins are from outside of the grain. So, but those beta glucanase and your glucoamylase are both exogenic, meaning they work from the outside in. So they start debranching all these segments that your alpha broke up, and it'll break those up into 1 or 2. Now, beta glucanase will sometimes leave, 2 molecules together, and so you'll have lots of 1s and 2s mixed up, right? And it does the same thing with the amylose. Your alpha and beta does the same thing with the amylose. It just breaks it up from the middle, and you still have the strings instead of the small branches, but it's still broken up. And your liquid glucose is going to break those up even better. So if you had to choose one between the beta glucanase or a glucoamylase, if I had to choose one, I would choose definitely the glucanase. You can use both. It's definitely not going to hurt. Might be a little overkill, especially nowadays that they've come, got it to more of a science, and it's much more efficient. But the glucanase used in the right amounts will break it up into almost all monosaccharides. You will have very few disaccharides, and it just keeps your yeast very, very happy. Yeah, it did, but there's no way to explain that without breaking it down and showing you. It's a lot more explanatory. I could do that without the pictures, but then it'd be hard to understand how and what's going on inside there, right? So yeast can't eat these. All these little pearls on these are just molecules of glucose. That's all they are. And as yeast can't eat them. They can't eat them like that. Their mouth, they just can't eat it. It's like trying to shove a whole tube of bologna in your mouth. You just can't eat it. You chop that bologna up in little pieces and you eat it all day long. Same thing here. The yeast can't eat it, and even a disaccharide, they can eat those. A little bit more stressful for them, like we were talking about earlier. The sucrose, the fructose glucose that makes the sucrose table sugar, it's a disaccharide versus the dextrose we were talking about, mono. The corn sugar syrups, mono. The cane juice that comes out is a mono. So those are single molecule sugars, and they don't have to be broken down. They're already simple sugars. But when it comes from a starch, those are complex sugars, and that's how they're broken down. And it explains a lot. Now I can show you also. We can get a little bit more in depth and more into science, and I can show you the actual enzyme, a picture of the actual enzyme that does it. Have to go to the advanced class pics for that. Let's see. Okay, let me show you this first. Okay, this chart here, now the cellulose over here, when we talk about pectic enzymes, this is something that breaks the cellulose up. Now that makes a wood alcohol, but sometimes we use pectic enzymes to break open fruit cells, right? The cells in the fruit that are holding all the sugars and all the good stuff that we want to get at. Now, these are natural sugars that don't have to be converted, but this amylase basically eats the cell walls up. And the cell walls is the cellulose. That's what makes up these cell walls. And it's the same thing in a plant cell. It's a plant cell, like the cellulose from wood. That's a cell, and you can basically use that to make alcohol out of wood. It's a much more complex process, much more expensive process to make it than just regular ethanol, thank God. But yeah, so what we're going to deal with is what's in the middle here with the amylose and amylopectin. Now you can see that it's branched the same way at the bottom here, and that shows its alignment and how it looks. And all of the complex starches that are in all your grains, cereal grains, all potatoes, pumpkins, anything that contains starch is going to contain those two starches, amylose and amylopectin. I've heard in one of the groups not too long ago, someone was saying that the starches are different in certain grains than the others. They're all basically amylose and amylopectin, varying percentages of each, but usually both are in there together. But it will vary by percentages. That's the only difference that you'll find is some may have more amylose and less amylopectin. Some may have more amylopectin and less amylose, but basically all the starches are the same. It's just different percentages. And maybe that's what they meant. I don't know, but yeah, it was kind of erroneous the way they worded it. But the actual enzymes that break those down, let me show you a picture of those. And let's see. Yeah, here's a glucanase. This is what glucanase looks like. This is a glucanase enzyme broken down, and you're looking at it as if it were in a electron microscope almost, basically. So this is what it looks like, and this is what attaches to the small strings. The oligosaccharides, the 3 to 12 strands of glucose chains. It attaches to these. Now you see these little circles and helixes. Those little strands of pearls per se goes up in those, and you see where each spiral can come into contact with each of those, and right where it comes into contact, it will break that glycosidic bond. See the bond that holds all those glucose molecules together is called a glycosidic bond. And all these little strands here will break that glycosidic bond and shear all those off, and it's called cleaving. And it cleaves all these molecules off the strand into individual monosaccharides, and it's brilliant how it works. It's amazing. Yes, yeah, you can make alcohol out of toilet paper, bro. You know, I mean, it's going to be really, it's prison shine, and it'll make you go blind and deaf. But yeah, you can make wood alcohol with pulp and water. It's a more difficult process, but yeah, let me show you a little picture here. I like my little pictures. I like pictures worth 1,000 words. It's amazing. But you remember me showing you a minute ago how all these, let me show you again. In this chart at the bottom, how cellulose forms in rows, like in columns like that. Wait till you see the enzyme that breaks those down. And you'll see what I'm talking about, how they fold into it. And that's actually one of the terms that they use, is folding and spiraling in. And this is cellulase. This is what's used to break down cellulose, and this is what a pectic enzyme basically is cellulase. And these, you can see those long strands of green. Those go right between those rows and lock in, and every place where it touches, it will break that bond. And its shape is what makes it so conductive into fitting in there and breaking it up. And it's amazing. Science is amazing. But yeah, it's amazing how that gets in between those little rows and breaks up all those strains and strings, of molecules, and breaks them apart. Well, that's interesting. I don't know if that's where these actual pictures came from, but yeah. And yeah, it's amazing. But yeah, a lot of the you're talking about in our brains. It's amazing. And what's really amazing is how our bodies are naturally, we were talking about earlier how, saliva, people don't really listen to biology in class and learn about it in physiology, but when we break down, the sugars and stuff that we're eating, our saliva starts the decomposing process. And as we swallow, enzymes are breaking down the food that we eat into its basic, um, elements or compounds that our body can consume and utilize. And we break the sugars and we store them in fats, and our muscles use them. It's all the same process. If you get to a certain point, it's all that our bodies do the same things with. And that's why glycogen I kind of excluded, but the glycogen is what's in our bodies. Yeah, but I'll have to read about Dr. Nichols. I'll read about that here in a little bit, because I'm definitely a info sieve, man. I'm a ADHD, dopamine junkie. I can't get enough info. Dr. David Nichols. And it's time to rose. Yep, these take 5-HT2 alpha receptor. Now, what type of brain receptor is this? What's it a receptor for? Oh, this is talking about psychedelics and how that works on the brain. I knew it had to do with some type of uptake. Oh, absolutely. I see what you're talking about now. Sure is. And if you phospholipase C, see that's just a different enzyme. See, it's the same. Yeah, that's just a different enzyme. And inositol, that's just a different starch or basically a sugar with glycerols. Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely have to read up about that. I mean, definitely into all that. And that's exactly very, very similar. I see what you're talking about. Yeah. That's interesting, Anthony. I've never read that, but I can see where some of the enzymes from your spit might help break down the husk more effectively. Oh yeah, I do. Cheek, cheeks a little more rosy. I ain't read enough, are they? Damn sure redder than when I started. Yeah. But yeah, our brains, what a lot of people don't understand is, our brains have natural THC receptors. So if we weren't meant to have THC in our bodies, why would we have a specific receptor for that in our brains? Think about that. You know, there's certain, because THC does work on a receptor inside our brain that is just for that. And I don't know of any other plant or any other material that we get it from other than that. Right. So it was there for a reason. Yeah. Yeah. Planting under the moon. Yeah. There was a lot of harvesting. They go by certain moons for harvesting, and there's a lot. People believe that that gravitational impact has a an impact on the resins and THC even. They say harvest your marijuana under full moon because there's it that the moon, I guess, being bright at night, that plant is working differently, is in total darkness maybe, or I don't know, maybe the gravity, the gravitational effect of the moon, and I don't know. But yeah, I've heard a lot of different things as far as almanacs, doing planting and harvesting by the moons, and I think that has to do with seasonal temperatures and averages and all that as well. Oh yeah. All right, y'all. Well, Anthony, I hope I took care of the basics. So just to rehash, start out with pH 5.3 boiling water, gelatinize 90 to 120 minutes, steep time, high temp amylase, cool to 140, add your liquid glucose, or if your label says 100, sometimes you have to wait to 100. It will depend on the liquid glucose that you use. Some is 140, some's 100, maybe 110. I use the 140. Add that, and if you want to throw in your at that 140, if you want to throw in some bran flakes or some malted grains or some DME like we were talking about earlier, LME or oats, which I do recommend a couple few handfuls of oats, and a little bit of bran flakes would be great for nutrients as well and for flavor. And then when it gets down to about 100 degrees, throw in your boiled and cleaned oyster shells in a dirty sock or a nice clean uh, cheesecloth, and then use your. I would probably use a daty yeast or a distiller's yeast. It's cheap. It's or bread yeast works well. I like the flavor of bread yeast. Fleischmann's works well. I've used that for many years. But either of those is fine for a grain, and add that. Keep it at about, if you're using either or, if bread yeast or that daty, keep it about 80, 85, and in about 3 to 5 days, that'll be ready to go. Drop your little hydrometer in there, get your starting gravity, and if it's low, you didn't get a good conversion, then you can add you a little bit of sugar to bump it up. If it's 1040, I'd recommend bumping it up a little bit to maybe a 1060, just enough to where you can get some production out of it and don't have to do that double run, or use a thumper, which I consider more intermediate distilling technique than a beginner's. A lot of beginners are using thumpers, and I think that's a problem because they're really not a beginner kind of thing, and you run into a lot of problems with that. But just simple, straight, pot distillation is just fine. And so that'll get you started. That'll be better than any sugar wash you could ever do. And it's not hard. It's not hard at all. And, um, it's not expensive. That corn will cost you, for that 50-pound bag, is going to be anywhere from 8 to 12, $13. Um, I don't think you're going to find that much, if you used sugar in 20, gallons of water, like we talked about, or 10 gallons of water, take 20 pounds of sugar is going to cost more than that corn did. And including the cost of the enzymes, even, it's going to be more expensive. So it's cheaper just to get your sugars out of that corn than to even use sugar. It's cheaper. Now there is more time and considering trouble. Boiling the water takes a little bit more energy, a little bit of gas. If you can do it on a stove, it's going to save you some money. You don't have to boil your water on a turkey fryer. You don't have to. You can steep it inside. It doesn't produce any. And as a matter of fact, most people say the flavor smells good. That mash. It smells like, got corn muffins are going. It's not a bad odor. So you get that started. You definitely be yeah. So I'm reading some of this other stuff. We're getting electroculture. I'm gonna have to read up on some of this stuff. Y'all see now I'm learning stuff. Yeah, Fleischmann's. I used that for many years. With my thin mashes, Fleischmann's, man, it made a good liquor. Much better than the sugar shine for sure. Just straight sugar without. But now that you know how to cook the corn and gelatinize it and extract those sugars from the corn, if you don't get a great conversion, it's not the end of the world. You can just throw in a little bit of sugar and just melt it. Get your sugar, get a gallon of water, melt you up a pound of sugar in it, and just add that. Check your hydrometer reading, add it until you get, you can add a couple pounds, I guess, would probably be more beneficial. That way you weren't adding more water and diluting it at the same time. But a couple pounds of sugar and a gallon of water, dissolve that and use your hydrometer. Now, do know that when you take hydrometer reading, that's calibrated for 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So there is a conversion table that comes with them, and you just have to make the simple conversion. It's not going to be a whole lot, but It'll tell you basically what your gravity is. And start at a 1060, bump it up, get you 1060, 1065, and you'll get you a good smooth drink. And let us know how. No, you can use fresh corn, but it's a lot more expensive to use fresh corn. It's better just to go to Tractor Supply, especially as a beginner. Just go to Tractor Supply and get you this deer corn with no additives, no pellets, no bullshit, just straight kernel, white dent, yellow 2 uh, corn, and grind it up yourself, or just get cracked corn, no additives, no bullshit, just straight cracked corn. Don't get any of the apple deer, none of that other stuff, um, and and no sweet feed, none of that other stuff. Just straight cracked corn or straight corn kernels. And you can see the corn kernels. If you have a grinder, awesome. If you don't have a grinder, I would highly recommend getting something. Or it takes forever. You can use a blender. After getting my grain meal, I can't imagine why I waited so long. Just bite the bullet. Try to get it Black Friday. You'll get a good deal on it, and it's something that you definitely won't. Yeah, breakfast cereal. I'm telling you, man. Those breakfast, they're flaked. The flaked cornflakes, gelatinized already. Any flaked corns, gelatinized. Bran flakes, gelatinized. All these flaked corns and all these cereals, they've been gelatinized already. So you don't even have to cook them. That's why you can just add them at whatever temp your amylase works at, and go. You don't even have to cook them because they've already been cooked and gelatinized. And yeah, and there's bird seed. There's a lot of starches and stuff that you can get out of the bird seeds and other things. I've had a bird seed bourbon, where you can just use the millet and all the different bird, grains and stuff. It's lots of different ways to extract it. But let's start with I highly recommend getting the corn kernels. That way it stays fresher longer. Grind it as you need it. And definitely the way to go. Does a high temp for your hydrometer make it float lower? That's a good question. Um, Let me get my chart. Well, I don't have that chart handy. Let's see. This doesn't have a chart. Let me see if I can pull up a quick chart. I usually don't. I don't do the conversion thing, and I don't. I know pretty much by my recipes and all that. I don't really do the conversion. I know about what it is. But it's a gradual. It's not a huge difference. We're talking maybe 2 or 3 points, which means nothing, to a beginner and to us. If it were an experiment and you had to be exacting, then yeah. Anything you can get sugars or starches from, you can ferment. Anything that has starches or sugars can be fermented, period. Whether they're efficient, you're going to be enough, that's left to be said. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of different things that can be fermented. And I'd say pine cones are covered in wild yeast too. So I'd say it sticks to them like, yeah. So you're going to have a lot of wild yeast and maybe some other things on there, some good, some bad. Yeah, I don't even fool with cook anymore. Steeping's so easy with the high temp. I just like to steep. I've got big ass coolers, and I got that 55-gallon drum that's got the 40 in it. That's I don't even fool with it anymore. Refractometers work great, right? Yeah, unless it's inverted sugar, and then that'll really throw those refractometers off when you run some inverted sugar in them. Try it out and see what happens, and let me know. I've not used the refractometers. I use the hydrometers. I think it was you I talked to that about. But yeah, it's I think the warmer the temp, the thinner the water is going to be. So I would say it's going to show lower than what it would normally be. So I think colder would be more dense. The molecules will be closer together. When it's hot, they're further apart. So I'm thinking it would probably sink further down. and show you less proof than what you have. And when it's colder, I would say the molecules are closer together, making it slightly more dense and floating higher. That's just based on the science but I would have to look at the chart. I agree, Clint. I think that's, as it gets hotter, the molecules spread further apart and it becomes less dense. Yeah, I need the hydrometer numbers on both sides too. I don't know or a mirror or something. It's but I just go by the colors now, so they can't fool me. I don't give a shit. All right, it's halfway in the yellow. All right, it's right on the yellow blue, or yeah, it's down into the blue, or yeah, it's down in the yellow under the blue. So I know pretty much now. But my proofing hydrometer, that's a biggie because it's all white and it's just graduated on one side, and it's really tough. I may just make a little black mark at every 10 degree, 10 proof. Yeah. But it's so strange. No matter how you tilt it or do it just turns away from you. It's like it knows where you are, man. There's a force of nature there. We have some ESP, some eyeball creating some kind of gravitational effect of turn. I don't know, man. There's something going on there. We need to experiment with that. Maybe if we had some of those cycle, some of those 5-HT2-A molecules in our brain, maybe we can figure that out. Yeah, and it's funny how it moves around. All right, y'all, we're at midnight. Yeah, we've gone 4 hours. It's been a good show, and I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for tuning in. Hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed, Anthony. Join us on DIY Shine and Steel Building. We changed the name recently. It used to be DIY Shine and Stuff. We are now DIY Shine and Steel Building because we kind of talk about both in there, and we're all into the DIY thing, and maybe we'll get into maybe some off-grid living and canning and preserving and doing some of those things too, or maybe it's just something we'll do in a different group. But I'm into all that kind of stuff. That's why I kind of dig watching Cyrus's videos and stuff too, because he gets into that off-grid living. And all right, well, we're gonna get there. But everybody, have a great Thanksgiving. And for the new people, we're here every Wednesday and Saturday at the same time, Eastern, 8 Eastern. And so unless our internet's down or it's a holiday or I'm off at some festival out gallivanting and having a good time, we'll be here. But tune in and bring questions, get stuff done. If you got any questions, write them down, bring them. If you don't have time, ask them in the group. We got Clint's there, I'm there, the DIY Shine and Steel Building. Also, Moonshine Militia, if you want to join there, just tell them that you saw the videos on Field Billy's and saw Bad Santa on Field Billy channel or Moonshine Militia channel on YouTube or wherever you see it. And just say that, because we're only bringing in people that are referred. So we're not open to the general public for obvious reasons. So yeah, on both of those, just say, I'm from the podcast, or I saw it on Santa's podcast or Field Billy's podcast or, Field Billy channel or whatever. And we'll know who you are and we'll get you in there. But definitely bring your questions there and ask them there. If you don't, same time, same back channel. We'll be here every Wednesday and Saturday. Everybody definitely have a good Thanksgiving. Spend some special time with family, and we will see you cats Saturday at 8 o'clock. Peace out. Happy Thanksgiving. Shine on.